up YouTube? Looks like we're online. Thank you all for joining today. Today we are going to continue looking at this very intense book, The Technological Society by Jacques Ellul. So for those who are new to the stream, this book is concerned with this thing called technique. I have this definition here from Wikipedia, which goes, Ellul argues that modern society is being dominated by technique, which he defines as a series of means that are established to achieve an end. Technique is ultimately focused on the concept of efficiency. So technique, the book called The Technological Society, emphasizes how technique is found all throughout society. For example, how the economy is structured, how governments operate. All of this is done with purpose, and the purpose is to increase efficiency. Now you might ask, efficiency of what? That is one of the big points of the book, which is maybe it does not even matter exactly what efficiency is working for. The technological society organizes itself on some kind of optimization, which gives birth to this very impersonal society. So if you're curious on learning more about technique, of course you could read the Technological Society book yourself. You could find it freely online, and you could view my previous streams as I go through the preceding chapters. Today we're looking at Chapter 5, Human Techniques. This chapter, I would say, is quite juicy. So I hope you enjoy and learn a lot through my presentation here. And of course, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them in the chat if you're live, or in the comments if you're viewing this at a different time, and I will try to get back to you asynchronously. We're joined by Reaper. What's up, Reaper? Okay, so context for today. So looking at my own YouTube feed, I came across this video today.
Very excited to be here.
And this was looking at the Milgram experiments. So if you do not know about the Milgram experiments, it might be something that's interesting for you to look up. In summary, some researchers did some experiments showing how a researcher could suggest things to a person, and they would like press a button and they thought they were administering shocks to somebody in a different room. And slowly the research would tell them to turn up the electricity, turn up the dose, turn up the dose, turn up the dose, such that the experimenters would eventually even make people like think they killed somebody, basically, with shocks. So you might be like, that's jacked up, that's messed up. Well, that is the sort of thing that now in psychology courses and stuff, you probably wouldn't be able to do this sort of experiment. But in the crazy, I don't know, when was this? The 70s? Look it up. Milgram experiments. In earlier days of social science research, people were able to do all sorts of stuff. Okay. So here, so maybe 60s, 70s, so actually a little bit after Jacques Ellul wrote his book, probably. We have a 1974 book here mentioned, Obedience to Authority, an Experimental View. Do you feel the power of science surging through your veins? Anyways, this was an interesting interview to see, especially to hear how I think these two people here are professors of psychology. It was interesting to hear how they talked about these things. So that's one of the cool things about YouTube. It's not just papers and he said, she said. One of the cool things is you could actually go out and see the faces behind publications. So that was an interesting interview. The second thing that's for today is this researcher, Lofty Zadeh. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce his name. Anyways, this fellow was featured on the Google Doodle today. So what sort of person would Google feature on their doodles? This person is famous as a mathematician, computer scientist, electrical engineer, artificial intelligence researcher, and professor of computer science at Berkeley. Now it seems that this person did some linguistics work, and a lot of linguistics, I've mentioned this briefly on this stream. Think about what is the purpose of social sciences. A lot of the time, somebody might go into social sciences naively, as I did, just thinking like, oh, I like languages, I'll go into linguistics, or I'm interested in learning about feelings, I'll go into psychology. But the social sciences are actually a very practical field, but the way in which they're practical might be alarming to somebody who hasn't investigated this further already. Just looking at stuff like we briefly mentioned the Milgram experiments. The social sciences are supported in the universities because you're developing tools and methods that actually get applied in the world. So with linguistics and artificial intelligence, these two fields are connecting now because there's a lot of automatic text or language analysis that people want to do. And you could think, what might the applications of that be? Well, probably stuff like spam filters, which is a type of, you could call that a type of censorship, though I think most people would want a spam filter in place if they knew how much spam would go through. Anyways, among other things, this fellow dealt with fuzzy semantics, fuzzy languages, fuzzy control, all these fuzzy things. So what's fuzzy about that? Well, one of the challenges that researchers have faced applying computer systems to human domains, such as those things that you'll study in the social sciences, is that it's not like a human typing computer code and then you just say right or wrong. The way that people express things and the sorts of things that people might be expressing aren't always declarative statements that are true or false, like 1 + 1 = 2. True. There's not much to talk about there, unless you're a number theory nerd. Then you might have a lot to say about that. But for most of us, you don't have much to say about 1 + 1 = 2. It's like true, computed, done, 1 + 2 = 2. No, that's false. You're done. Now, when we're dealing with language and stuff, of course, we're doing a lot more than just making declarative statements of that nature. So one of the things that this fellow did, just looking at his Wikipedia, is he would try to model sentences using predicate logic. So they have this example sentence here: John is bold. So you might represent that to a computer as bold John. So this bold predicate applies to John. And then if you want to make that fuzzy, like say John is somewhat bold or something like that, then you might find some way to tack on some tag or something like this. Anyways, all this sort of research is people trying to find ways of representing human language, human, and eventually human thought that will be below the language in order to automatically process these things. Once you have a way in which a computer could represent all sorts of facts about speech, then that means that the Pandora's box is open for the application of artificial intelligence and all of that to linguistic applications, which in the past has been quite hard to analyze. So a lot of linguistic theories haven't really been useful. I'll just say it that way. Anyways, that was the Google Doodle of the day for Lofty A. Zadeh. And it looks like someone made quite a striking statue of him on his grave. Cool. So we return to Jacques Ellul, and I bring up first this psychology thing, the Milgram experiments, and then second this Google Doodle, because one of the things I'm trying to do in this stream is to contextualize a reading of a book from decades ago, so in this case the Technological Society, with stuff that's going on right now that's relevant to us. We're not just reading idly, but we want to better understand what's happening in the world, such that we could position ourselves to act accordingly. And we don't have a bias towards good news or bad news here. Instead, let's just try to see clearly what's happening and then understanding the situation better, right? You could act more effectively for your loved ones, family, friends, and so on. Okay. Okay, so I just had a little summary here of this video with the Milgram experiments. So one question was, how do people even come to participate in these experiments to begin with? Nowadays, they often require undergraduates taking psychology classes to participate in them, so people do because they have to. But besides that, people might also believe in that they're advancing some greater good. Particularly if you believe, like, you might submit yourself to an experimental treatment because you think that by volunteering, even if there might be some risk, more risk than usual, that you're doing society a good by helping develop some technique, some technology. Okay, and so these Milgram experiments showed people respond to authority, especially when they're scared and under pressure. People turn and listen to a voice that speaks with clarity, telling them what to do. And the two people being interviewed in this Alison Morrow video, they also mentioned how people might associate more closely with the experimenter or technician that looks similar to them or somehow in some way they identify with. And we're going to be talking about propaganda and some other topics in this stream. But just me looking at my own life, people I've known or people I still speak with and stuff, you could consider how in recent times all these diversity moves, diversity hiring. Yes, on one hand, it is about bringing in traditionally underrepresented groups into various corporations, positions of power, and so on and so forth. But think about the practical reasons of why you might want to do that. If we accept this finding that indeed people might respond more readily to the suggestions of someone that looks like them, then is it a surprise that Disney, for example, is having more Asian and Asian American stuff? If they want to have more sway on Asian and Asian American populations, telling, brown-eyed, black-haired people how to think and feel and how to approach the world, then, lo and behold, it seems like it's working. Same thing with like Netflix and their recent Squid Game and all of that. It's like you put these things out and people identify with the signals being sent out because you put in a technician that looks like them. Lo and behold, that's a very useful technique for capturing a particular group. Okay, Reaper says, how much do we know about psychology comes from pathological psychology students used as test subjects? Funny that you should mention that. I'll bring up this one acronym. I believe we've actually discussed this before, but for those who are not in the know, one criticism of a lot of psychology, social science type experiments is that they use very biased samples. So there's this acronym WEIRD, weird, Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, to describe the sorts of people that participate in these studies. And now returning to this and looking at this acronym again, I think that this quite aptly captures many aspects of what you would say is the case of somebody who is well integrated into a technological society, as Jacques Ellul is describing. So, of course, when you have industrialization, you're going to get increased specialization, more abstraction of the type of role that you're doing. So you're not, by definition, if we're talking about an industrialized society, you're not going to be like a farmer doing manual labor, working your land. Rather, you're probably operating some machinery, doing some paperwork, something like that. Rich, or relatively rich, at least in the sense that your society is probably producing a lot of things of which you could participate in. That would be one of the main reasons that people would industrialize, right? So that they could be richer in the sense that they produce and sell more things. Democratic and Western, I think those could go together. It has to do with ideas about voting, representation, stuff like that. And then this word educated here, then, by definition, if you're a psychology student at a university, then you're in higher education. So educated too could mean you're going through more basically technological society brain work. And we'll get into more of that as we continue. So, good point by Reaper, bringing out the psychology students themselves. And yeah, you could think, how might that influence the results of these studies? And I'm agreeing, yes, it probably could influence the studies quite a lot. But if we look too at the technological society and what Jacques Ellul is writing, I think Jacques Ellul would rightly point out that the technological society is marching on to encapsulate more and more and more, or capture more and more different people, different places of life, such that everybody is assimilated to that thing. So right now, a minority might be weird, but the technological society is about making everybody weird in the sense of Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. So we'll get more into that. Okay, continuing. Oh, so I also want to do a brief promo for my own video. So on the last stream, I got some feedback that I was using words like they and them, and sometimes it wasn't exactly clear who I was talking about. So I made this video essay, Who Are They? So do check out my video if you want to learn more about them. Okay, continuing. So, the chapter we're looking at is called Human Techniques, and it starts with a section subtitled Necessities. So let's take a look at this. A quote, "The tempo of man's work is not the traditional ancestral tempo, nor is its aim the handiwork which man produced with pride, the handiwork in which he contemplated and recognized himself." So what sort of things might this kind of traditional handiwork be? Think of just all the sorts of traditional crafts. Even there's a joke in universities that they have every class, even underwater basket weaving. This is kind of told as a joke, like, oh, underwater basket weaving. That's just the total nonsensical, stupid thing. But, if you were actually making baskets underwater, that would qualify, I think, as handiwork. So everybody's handiwork will be unique because people are assembling it themselves. And yeah, every item would be unique in a non-mechanized process. They might follow the same pattern. They might be very similar, but just because of the nature of our reality, everything you make would be unique. And so in that sense, with handiwork, there's contemplation, and an aspect of you is expressed in your work. Whether you like it or not, your personhood comes through how you operate with your hands, or however you're making this thing. Just like if you own a vineyard and I owned a vineyard and we both made wine, my wine would be different from your wine. Even if we tried to do the exact same thing, it'd be different. It reflects not just the quantities of grapes and those little differences, but also too the quality of the land, and all these different things. It would be a function of an expression of a person. Okay. So the tempo of the modern world, the technological society, is quite different from the traditional tempo. Now, here I think mainly we're thinking about like 9-to-5 type jobs, or even very established paths. Like right now, as a freelancer type person, I'm not operating under these constraints. Like as making a YouTube channel, I don't log hours, and I do work at the tempo that I see fit. But like I've worked for companies and stuff before. When you work for a company, it's not going to be the same way. They'll probably have lunch break at this time. You do this at that time. It's very common to have that sort of thing. Okay, so I made a note here that when we're talking about the tempo, ancestral tempo here in this quote, this could do with the pacing of a day. But even beyond that, you could look at like the weekly schedule. So for example, do you have to work on the weekends? Do you have to work 7 days a week? So on. Also the monthly and the seasonal schedule. So if we're thinking about farming, for instance, it might be a natural workflow that during the winter you do less work because there's less sunlight and you can't prepare the fields if it's snowing. So depending on the season, you might do different sorts of work. Like maybe during the winter, it's mostly you gathering firewood, something like that. Whereas in the autumn or in the spring, you're like digging ditches, doing other sorts of work. And finally, the course of a large project over years. So if we think about more traditional type work, let's just say you're in construction. Well, there's a clear sense in which you could see the project building, getting bigger. And a lot of people will remark that have done some sort of construction work that they feel a sense of satisfaction just doing something that's very tangible. On the other hand, for those of you here who have worked in computers and technology, these sorts of fields, it might be like the older a project gets, the more convoluted and terrible it gets and hard to manage, as opposed to you visually having an indicator that you're working towards some kind of completion. So there's a couple areas that might be different between a traditional ancestral tempo, and the sort of modern workflow. Okay. Jacques Ellul then gives a pretty rough definition for the technological society type workday. So let's see what he says. He writes, "Today's work is an aimless, useless, and callous business, tied to a clock. An absurdity profoundly felt and resented by the worker whose labor no longer has anything in common with what was traditionally called work." Oof. So I think that I don't need to explain that much if you found yourself in this situation. But also too, if you're like coming from being a student in school. Probably most students have the experience of sitting in a classroom and then seeing how it's a nice day outside and thinking, wow, wouldn't it be nice if I could just go run around and hang out outside? But instead you find yourself having to sit down at a desk, maybe with artificial lighting and air conditioning and stuff, where it's a perfectly fine day to go run around outside and stuff. But because you're tied to a clock, might feel absurd. Yes, so in the technological society, a general fact is that a lot of work becomes much more abstract, mediated, whether by layers of bureaucracy, paperwork, all of that. But it isn't like you're directly working on the land, like farming, and so you lose the ancestral or traditional tempo. A while ago, I was actually reflecting on what work is. So here, the link to this will be in the description. I was writing a blog post actually about what is work. So I started, in this essay, I will try to unabstract the notion of work or toil, labor. Work is not the same thing as making money. Evidently, there are many people in this world who have a lot of money through no application of effort on their part, like getting money through inheritance, winning the lottery, or having profited from some form of speculation or investment. And then I go on to say why, like, understanding what work was to me when I was writing this was important, because I think it's important for people to do work. So then I went on to write about, like, what is work? So I talked about different types of workers, managing people, merchants, artisans, craftsmen, judges, lawyers, regulators, and all this. Anyways, if you're interested, go check out my essay and my blog, which will be linked in the description. Okay. Continuing. Oh, another thing I wanted to show is, of course, throughout history, there have been a lot of people who have complained about how the depersonalization, the unnatural rhythms and stuff of the modern world are very tough on people. Naturally, we want to be a certain way just as humans, and then when we're put in these very artificial systems, we have to really become conditioned to be able to accept them at all. So one infamous example of a person who had a lot of things to say about this would be the infamous Uncle Ted. So if you do want to read that and you're interested in learning about the problems of modern society, I recommend checking out the Xa Li critical edition. It's quite interesting. So, for example, in this manifesto, I'll just read a paragraph from Over-Socialization. And I quote, "Psychologists use the term socialization to designate the process by which children are trained to think and act as society demands. A person is said to be well socialized if he believes in and obeys the moral code of his society and fits in well as a functioning part of that society. It may seem senseless to say that many leftists are over-socialized, since the leftist is perceived as a rebel. Nevertheless, the position can be defended. Many leftists are not such rebels as they seem." So, interesting point being brought up here. You could still look in 2021 how many leftist causes seem to be quite institutionally supported. It's like if you're attending a leftist protest, you're attending a state-sanctioned outrage session. So I won't say more on that here, but things to look at or think about, perhaps. Okay, continuing looking at this chapter 5 Jacques Ellul book and reading some quotes. And I'm going in order, by the way, so if you do refer to this video or look at the text yourself, I'm not jumping around, just going straight through the chapter. Okay, so here's a quote. The human being was made to breathe the good air of nature, but what he breathes is an obscure compound of acids and coal tars. He was created for a living environment, but he dwells in a lunar world of stone, cement, asphalt, glass, cast iron, and steel. The trees wilt and blanch among sterile and blind stone facades. Cats and dogs disappear little by little from the city, going the way of the horse. Only rats and men remain to populate a dead world. Man was created to have room to move in, to gaze into far distances, to live in rooms which, even when they were tiny, opened out on fields. Seeing him now enclosed by the rules and architectural necessities imposed by overpopulation, in a 12 by 12 closet opening out on an anonymous world of city streets. So this quote describing a lot of how people live in cities these days. I found this quote interesting for a number of reasons, and I'll just name two of them. The first one's kind of stupid. It's I think he was wrong about the cats and the dogs. In big cities, I think you'll see a lot of people with cats and dogs. So that's kind of the silly aside. Perhaps more important is the second point I have, which is I've noticed that in both dystopian and utopian type depictions of futuristic cities, they still share many of these common features. So here I wrote, in both utopian and dystopian visions of the future, you'll see features like stone, cement, asphalt, glass, cast iron, and steel, as it's stated in those quotes. So to demonstrate this, here's just like a travel type article, 10 most modern cities in the world. So a lot of these cities, they were built out to be really modern and cool. And as this is a travel site, they're trying to make these cities look good in these various pictures. But you'll see, these similar features of lot of these manufactured materials, like a lot of shaped metal. Of course, these buildings often have huge glass things. Here's like a walkway. It's all paved over. Lights, wires, things like that. So, as I said, travel website trying to show like the positive side of these cities. So you look at this site and say, oh yeah, that looks really cool and modern. And you could see even in these cities positively portrayed as being cool and modern. The description here fits of stone, cement, asphalt, glass, cast iron, and steel, so on. And then something closer to Jacques Ellul's time was this city of Brasilia. So a planned city, supposed to be very cool and futuristic. And sure enough, what features do you find? Like a lot of the shaped metal, concrete, monolithic slabs, all these sorts of things. So that was interesting to think about. Oh, another interesting site to look at this sort of stuff, like visions of the future, is to look at various airports. If you look at airports and the images and artwork and things that are associated with airports, you'll get a lot of content regarding kinds of visions of futurism of various sorts. Okay. Now, so this I portrayed as kind of a utopian side of things, looking at nice, slick, modern cities. Now, on the other hand of what you might call like a dystopian view of the future, I'm bringing up once again the cyberpunk aesthetic. And if we look at examples of the cyberpunk aesthetic, then we see these similar features. Maybe the difference is, rather than portraying these things during the daytime on nice sunny days, a lot of the times we're looking at stuff portrayed at night. And then also too, it's not maybe nice shiny slabs and stuff, nice slick technology, but rather things are looking more worn down and dirty. And if you yourself go and look around any major city and look at some old modern buildings, it'll probably look more like the cyberpunk sort of pictures, because stuff will get worn down. And, you know, if you have a big, like, white painted slab or something, it's hard to keep that sort of thing clean. So here, yeah, this is looking more modern, slick, utopian rather than dystopian. There's light effects. But then, yeah, I think this is like Blade Runner. Yeah, even that one is more optimistic with this lighting, kind of saying like, wow, cool. Whereas we could probably find some more examples of like, oh yeah, that's the slums. I don't want to live in the slums. So here's like the opening thing, you know, very gray, muted colors, and so on. This doesn't look like a happy romantic place. Okay. Anyway, so that's just to say, interesting to see how looking utopian, dystopian views of the future, just future talk, technology talk in general, has common features. Oh, and then some more art history aside. So these styles, Art Deco, Art Moderne, Streamline Moderne. I'm not going to speak in really precise terms about these. I'm sorry if I offend a guru, I don't know, an expert on these subjects. I'm not too well learned in them. In any case, during the early 20th century, then these styles were expressing this sort of modernist, futuristic bent. So what does being futuristic and modern and cool look like? And you could look at examples of that sorts of buildings and the motifs that go on with them. You could see a lot of geometry sort of stuff being used, and these cement forms, a lot of concrete. Just a couple more links. So a painting of this sort of thing, this might be how you're envisioning a cool, slick, modern city. Utopia vibe. So all these, they have a feeling of like motion, modernism, and general, I would say like a positive vision of stuff. Not saying like things suck, but more along the lines of like, you know, this could be you. This could be cool. That sort of vibe. Yeah, especially you get some like fashionable young people, all this sort of stuff. So these things are being portrayed positively. Now, on the other hand, you go and you look at, like, I don't know, I'm just going to search old Soviet buildings. Let's add the word abandoned to make sure that these buildings look bad. Then you could see stuff that maybe was from a similar period to the Art Deco, Art Moderne, all these periods. But then this is kind of like the failed dystopian version of it. So it looks like a, you know, giant UFO crashed. Looks like a really, I don't know how to describe that. Anyways, these are buildings that are probably uninhabitable, probably filled with like rodents or wolves and stuff. But you could see how they probably used to look really cool, futuristic, slick, like those examples of the artworks we were showing. But as the technological ambitions of a planned society failed, then what you're left with is these sorts of images of buildings that are like ruins, basically ruins within, you know, the past 100 years, but nevertheless ruins, abandoned, failed, done, no more. And if not demolished, right, they're just sitting there kind of like ghost cities. Cool. All right, so continuing on with Jacques Ellul book. So Jacques Ellul says, every man is in this fix. So in this fix meaning they're being put into the technological society, and there's a lot of difficulties that happen forcing a person into this type of society just because of human nature. So this fix is dealing with human beings who are made, to work and stuff in a certain way, and now you're forcing them in a different sort of system. Okay, so every man is in this fix, not merely the proletariat, and nothing can be done about it. What was once the abnormal has become the usual, standard condition of things. Even so, the human being is ill at ease in his strange new environment, and the tension demanded of him weighs heavily on his life and being. He seeks to flee and tumbles into the snare of dreams. He tries to comply and falls into the life of organizations. He feels maladjusted and becomes a hypochondriac. But the new technological society has foresight and ability enough to anticipate these human reactions. It has undertaken, with the help of techniques of every kind, to make supportable what was not previously so, and not indeed by modifying anything in man's environment, but by taking action upon man itself. Okay, so problem. What's the problem? Technological society goes against natural human condition, human needs, wants, things like that. So what's the solution? Do we change society? No, you don't change society. What you do, if you're a technician, technological society operator, you operate on the people themselves. So psychology informs technicians how to act upon man himself. We have, quote, man is able to endure famine, discomfort, and the most abnormal conditions. He can make intensive and lasting efforts provided he is psychologically doped. So that's to say, you could call it the indomitable human spirit, refer to the ability for humans to endure and to fight to live no matter what. You could call that what you may. Now, how do you keep people motivated and wanting to live within the technological society? So, in short, Jacques Ellul says the technological society creates for people a new religion, and we'll explore more what that means. But here's the quote from Jacques Ellul. It says, in short, man creates for himself a new religion of a rational and technical order to justify his work and to be justified in it. Now, I just want to briefly look at this word rational here. So, in what sense is the technical order rational? So, everything in the technological society is going to have to do with a optimization of some sort. For example, it's easy to think of a factory. The factory wants to produce more widgets, more units of whatever. So, you could arrange everything in the factory such that this one number goes up. So, in a sense, you look at a technological society by various number metrics, right? Every little specialty, everything is a game in some sense. And in that way, it's a rational and technical order because there's all these technical activities that you could tweak in order to get higher metrics of some kind. And right, insofar as you are contributing to that order, right, you could be justified in this new religion of the rational and technical order. So, basically, okay, you're going to invent a new religion. Basically, how is it that people will accept this? And here's a Jacques Ellul quote. It is thus possible through psychological means to draw from man his last measure of effort and at the same time compel him to bear up under the disadvantages with which the new society hinders him. This is the first goal of psychological techniques. The only thing that matters technically is yield production. This is the law of technique. This yield can only be obtained by the total mobilization of human beings, body and soul, and this implies the exploitation of all human psychic forces. Okay, so psychology. Why is this important? Because if you control the psychology, then you could have people all in the technological society. Okay, and I made a note here that has to do with the modern world. So I've been implying, but I'll state it explicitly, that in this era, the 21st century, I think that we're living in an increasingly technological society. So Jacques Ellul's talking about his time in the mid 20th century. I'm saying we're just living in an increasingly even more technological society. So my note here is about what producing is. So the only thing that matters technically is yield production in the technological society. One thing I think is in our current era, what we're seeing is the things that you produce don't even have to be physical. Like here, I'm making a YouTube video. I'm producing. I'm a content creator. Woo, right? Cool. Activities like writing books, making videos, all this stuff. This could also be called a type of production, and I don't think it's hard to see how social media platforms, whatever, they want people to produce in the sense of interacting with these platforms to organize information. That too could be called a type of production. All right. So the next subheading is modification of milieu and space. And I put up a definition here of milieu because not all of us speak French, myself included. So milieu is a social setting or environment or a particular medium. So there's a technological milieu or environment, something like that. And people are made to fit into this thing. So here's another Jacques Ellul quote. The machine tends not only to create a new human environment, but also to modify man's very essence. The milieu in which he lives is no longer his. He must adapt himself, as though the world were new, to a universe for which he was not created. He was made to go 6 kilometers an hour. He goes 1,000. So this is saying, we look at the modern world, it's very unnatural to just me if I go and walk outside. Like, maybe it wouldn't be normal, it wouldn't be uncommon, for instance, to do something like drive 30 minutes to see a friend. Now, if you were to walk that distance, that might be quite a big ask of somebody to walk the distance of a car driving 30 minutes. So in terms of just actual reality, without the aid of our technology, then our world is very hostile to just a human being. You can't just go outside and start growing a farm for most people. Okay, so what are some other characteristics of this world we find ourselves? In many ways, we're richer. So here, quote, admittedly, the machine has enriched man as it has changed him. The machine's senses and organs have multiplied the powers of human senses and organs, enabling man to penetrate a new milieu and revealing to him unknown sights, liberties, and servitudes. He has been liberated little by little from physical constraints. He is all the more the slave of abstract ones. He acts through intermediaries and consequently has lost contact with the reality. Whoa. Okay, so just looking here at unknown sights, liberties, and servitudes, we're doing that very thing right here with this stream. Like I was showing you photographs of various places. We were only able to share these images with the help of the technology. Servitudes, I'll include computer servers as servitudes I'm enjoying. And right, liberty. So being able to broadcast like this, in the past, maybe only very few people got to do broadcasting if you worked your way up to be a radio broadcaster or something. But now even a rogue academic like Alan is able to stream. Okay, more quotes. Technique has changed all sorts of areas, including our food. Oh, that's my note. Okay, here's a quote. Beginning with Sylvester Graham's Treatise on Bread, a number of studies have shown to what degree the organic structure of bread has been modified by the machine and by the science of chemistry. The result was a profound modification of taste to the type of bread which corresponds exactly to the demands of mass production. So Jacques Ellul is talking about how in his era, mid-20th century, then even basics for life, like bread is bread of life. It's spoken of daily bread as something that's extremely common for every day. The very structure of the bread has changed due to the evolution of the technological society. Now, I just wanted to bring up a big red pill for you all. In our current times, food has been being changed a lot. And one way is that these seed-based oils, such as canola oil, are everywhere. And if you look at how the stuff like canola oil is made, it's made in industrial processes. Let's get to the view of the factory. So here, the stuff that looks like poo that's coming out, they smash the canola seeds, and then this stuff that comes out, the cakes, that's not the oil itself, they'll use that as animal feed. So people will eat a lot of canola oil, most people, and then even the animals that we're eating, like chickens and cows and stuff, they will be feeding on these industrial waste products of the canola oil. So they're collecting that cake here. And then there's all these stages that the oil goes through, processing it again and again. This is not just smashing olives. And oftentimes they'll be using chemicals like bleach. So they'll be like bleaching the oil, processing it in all sorts of ways. And yeah, look, observe the sludge. Now, mind you, this video clip here, it's supposed to show like how cool and modern this stuff is. But you take a look at this and you're like, oh man, actually I could see why a lot of people are saying maybe this stuff is not so good to eat. So, yeah. Canola oil. Anyways, I bring up canola oil first because I think it's useful to have that knowledge about what exactly a lot of these vegetable oils are that are all over the place. So you could be informed, choose not to eat them, and experience the health benefits thereof. And secondly, just to say, as Jacques Ellul is talking about how in his time, bread changed because they started to do these industrial processes with bread. So in our era, too, we could see how a lot of food is changing. And what are the changes that are going on in our era? Probably you're going to see a lot more seed-based oil, canola oil, all that stuff. And then you're also going to see like various meat substitutes and things that are also a big soup of chemicals. Might taste good, but will it be good for you? Probably not. Okay. Quote, "We are registering a fact and not nostalgia for the old whole wheat bread of our ancestors. It is a fact of the same order as the retreat of wine before Coca-Cola. The ancient civilization of wine is becoming obsolescence as a result of an industrial product." So he's writing from France. So American invasion of Coca-Cola replacing centuries-old winemaking tradition in France. Yeah, we could see the United States is at the forefront of a lot of these food transformations. And not surprisingly, I don't think people generally perceive the U.S. as a particularly healthy country overall. I wonder why. Continuing. Okay. So I'm going to skip my own notes here and go to this section, modification of time and motion. So I'll read this quote here. "The man until recently got along well enough without measuring time precisely. It's something we never even think about, and that we do not think about it shows to what degree we have been affected by technique. What means there were in the past for measuring time belonged to the rich, and until the 14th century exerted no influence on real time or life. Until then, there were mechanical orologia, which did not so much mark the hour as indicate it very proximately by bells or chimes. The clock tower with its public clock made its appearance towards the end of the century. Until then, time had been measured by life's needs and events. At most, life had been regulated since the 5th century by church bells, but this regulation really followed a psychological and biological tempo. The time man guided himself by corresponded to nature's exact time. It was material and concrete. It became abstract probably towards the end of the 14th century, which it was divided into hours, minutes, and seconds. Little by little, this mechanical kind of time with its knife-edge divisions penetrated along with machinery into human life. So yeah, I mean, I'll just confirm that growing up, like being in school, having a clock on the wall, looking at the clock, this was all very common stuff. And especially if you're indoor in a space where maybe there's not very much light or windows or something like that, then even more, your perception of time, you don't have the sun and other indicators to tell you that. Instead, you're relying on an artificial mechanical thing. A viewer of the show mentioned the topic of this thing, chronemics. So I'll pull up the Wikipedia on chronemics if you're interested in thinking more about time and measuring it. So let's look at this article really quick. Chronemics is the role of time in communication. It is one of the several subcategories to emerge from the study of non-verbal communication. According to the Encyclopedia of Special Education, chronemics includes time orientation, understanding and organization, use and reaction to time pressures, our innate and learned awareness of time. That's probably the most interesting. Wearing or not wearing a watch, arriving, starting, and ending late or on time. The way someone values and perceives time plays a considerable role on his or her communication process. The use of time can affect lifestyle, personal relationships, and work life. Across cultures, people usually have different time perceptions, and this can result in conflict between individuals. Time perceptions include punctuality, interactions, and willingness to wait. 3 main types of time are used in chronemics: interactive, conceptual, and social. So I'm not going to go through the whole article on chronemics here, but just to say, if you're interested in learning more about time and how people have perceived it, then yes, looking into this topic might be a useful way to have a vocabulary to talk, for example, how mechanized factory time, school time, technological society time differs from, say, the natural rhythms of life, the rising, the setting of the sun, even counting hours while you work, that sort of thing. It's an interesting topic to look at. I'll just say, for my content here, like on the stream, not only my streams, but the other videos I do, I don't really look at a clock while I do it. I just make the videos, and then it comes out however long it did. So, interestingly, for the videos I've done that aren't streams, they've all come out like roughly 10 to 20 minutes ish, which is kind of that clickbait sweet spot. But I didn't even try to do that or time it. That's sort of the natural rhythm of like a video essay type thing becomes 10 to 20 minutes. So interesting. Maybe there's something natural about that sort of format. And maybe there's something natural too about streaming. It's just like I'm going to sit here and I'm going to do the stream until I'm done with my notes. I don't know how long that will take. Will it take 2 hours, 3 hours? I don't know. Maybe 8 hours. We'll see. Not going to look and manage based on the mechanical clock. All right, continuing with the Ellul. So, since the first private clocks appeared, so think in a house, wall clock, rather than the clock tower being the public clock. Time was an abstract measure separated from the traditional rhythms of life and nature. it became mere quantity. But since life is inseparable from time, life was too forced to submit to the new guiding principle. From then on, life itself was measured by the machine. Its organic functions obeyed the mechanical. Eating, working, and sleeping were at the beck and call of machinery. Time, which had been the measure of organic sequences, was broken and dissociated. Human life ceased to be an ensemble, a whole, and became a disconnected set of activities, having no other bond than the fact that they were performed by the same individual. So, if any of you dread the ringing of an alarm clock and have operated for a significant amount of time based on clocks, then you know how exhausting that could be. Whereas if you're in a position to be more free, like let's just say your job starts at 9 a.m., but you just wake up like anyways by yourself at 6 a.m., there's a real liberty to not having to worry about an alarm clock. And I would say generally you'll feel better if you could structure your schedule so you're able to do that sort of thing. But right, clocks are normal, so you participate, especially you're more institutionally bound. What you find is that clocks and living life on clockwork is everywhere. Continuing. So my note here, clocks represent mechanical motion. I think that's easy enough to see. Our motions are no longer entitled to express our own personalities. It suffices to take one look at distracted and panicked elderly people in the middle of a Paris street to understand that modern velocities render motion abstract and no longer tolerate imperfect motions just because they are human. So, anecdote, I'll talk about my life. I remember growing up, I was never really too interested or excited to drive a car, because to me, it didn't feel free or interesting. Like, sure, I could go places that it might take longer by another method, but if I had the alternative to walk or ride a bike or something, I would much rather walk or ride my bike, because I could choose pacing. It would take a little bit longer, but I would enjoy doing the walking or the biking. Whereas when I was riding a car and stuff, I would feel much more strictly regulated, because you have to follow traffic laws and all that. So when you're driving, it's very mechanical, very, very controlled. It's not a very free thing, because you are put under mechanical motion. And you could look at speed limits too. Sometimes you might be asked to go faster than you want to. For example, maybe you're driving through an area, you want to go slower in order to take in some scenery. If the speed limit's higher and there's other cars there, you might be forced to go faster than you want. Likewise, you might be forced to go slower than you want. There's speed limit radar enforced. Or maybe you could run faster if you wanted, but you're stuck in traffic. You're not going to just get out of your car and run. All right. So, yeah, here we have this phrase. It's like perfection of movement. Imperfect motions, like the human movements are described as imperfect. In this quote, what would the perfect motions be? That would be movement decided by technique. So you have some job, something you're producing, some metric you're optimizing, then there might be a most efficient way to do it. That would be the perfection of movement. Whereas if you just do it in a human, organic way, then you're doing it wrong. You got to conform to the technique. Technological society. Continuing. So Jacques Ellul then goes on to talk about the creation of a mass society. So just to contextualize this again, we're talking about psychology. So how is it that you change humans in order to make them more compatible, to work better with the technological society? So a mechanism or a thing that Jacques Ellul suggests to do this is the creation of mass society. So here's a quote. "It is a truism to state that contemporary society is becoming a mass society. The process of massification, the ascension of the masses, has been thoroughly studied and understood. Less well understood, however, is the fact that the man of the present is not spontaneously adapted to the new form of society. Okay, so the fact is society is becoming more of a mass society. Like Coca-Cola is I think, pretty easy to understand example. Like, everybody drink this. You go to all sorts of little restaurants, they're probably going to have like a Coke or Pepsi machine. Now, how do you get people to accept this, to accept a mass society, homogenous culture, this sort of thing? How do you get people to accept that? I wanted to bring up a visualization too. Now, if you told people, like, we're going to make you conform to mass society, a lot of people probably wouldn't be very happy with that idea if you just tell them up front. And for example, there's these memes like this, the NPC meme, right? I don't think anybody would enjoy being told, oh, you're just an NPC participating in mass society. Yet, as Jacques Ellul is expressing, right, I think we all get caught up to various degrees in this thing. And how does it happen, right? So let's learn more about the psychology and how humans are operated upon in the technological society. So here we have a contrast of the mass from the individual. Quote, the process of massification takes place not because the man of today is by nature a mass man, but for technical reasons. Man becomes a mass, and the framework, that word again, framework, imposed upon him because he is unable to remain for long at variance with his milieu. So to fit into the framework, you have to adapt to massification in some way, right? We just think about techniques, technological society. It's like on an assembly line. All the different roles to be fulfilled are defined. Now, how do you, as a person, conform and fulfill one of those roles? Well, you're going to have to conform to the system, massification, in some respect. Okay. And another quote, there is no doubt that norms of our civilization have changed for reasons which are not human. Men as a whole had no desire for the change that occurred, nor did they work toward them consciously. Indirect influence have operated on the norms of modern society, and these norms have been transformed without knowing what's happening. And I wanted to share briefly, too, this horrifying image of the corporate art style to show what does massification look like in the 21st century. Well, let's look at the sort of people that you're supposed to be. So there's this big tech corporate art style. So here, it's just a good visual embodiment of this whole idea of the technological society. You see people, oftentimes their faces are blank, or their heads are much, much smaller, and then their bodies, they're very colorful. Now, what would one reason be for all this color? One of the reasons is what they call generative art. You could just generate a different image by shifting out various variables. Let me actually search that up. Generative art. Okay, Wikipedia. Generative art refers to art that in whole or in part was created with the use of an autonomous system. An autonomous system in this context is generally one that is non-human and can independently determine features of an artwork that would otherwise require decisions to be made directly by the artist. So it doesn't look like they have corporate art style. Okay, NFTs. Yeah, we could look at how this is used in NFTs. I'm going to actually search CSS. Maybe somebody made an example. Okay, here looks like Renchuan. maybe this developer. Generative art with CSS. Scroll. Okay, so maybe it's just the background that he's showing off here. How he could generate all those different circle patterns. Okay, so these are more, those ones are all more advanced. Anyways. Here, okay, you can see like there's a lot of geometric things. Because to generate, like put in computer code to make like a colored square or something, that's easier to do with a computer as opposed to like drawing something more organic like a person. So if you're making some generative art to make like different patterns and stuff with squares and rectangles, that would be easier to do. So you can see how the technique itself influences the sort of art that you'll see. Let's see, Reaper says, I don't think corporate art is generative art. I think the commentary on corporate art would go in the direction of branding messaging that shows a corp has a soul. Yeah, I think you might be right. Generative art is probably the wrong search term. The idea I'm trying to show is like with an avatar, you know, you could swap out the hairstyle, right? You could like scroll through and swap out those things. So there's like a fixed process to make these things. I've seen before with the corporate art style how these characters, there might be like a, like you see like in this one, there's 3 people that are walking in a line. Then somebody might have some corporate art pack where they have that same image, but then they have different combinations of these different characters. Maybe like this person's in the front and then their hair is blue, that sort of thing. So that's what sort of example I was looking for really quick, but I couldn't find it immediately. If I knew a specific term, I'd probably be able to find it. But yeah, I think the general idea here is still holding that, yeah, this corporate art, yes, Reaper here is saying kind of corporation's soul. So it is in the sense saying like everybody has a place, right? Everybody could belong in this corporation, whether you're, you know, guy with radial hair or girl with H2O hair or, you know, fedora dude or Wario or, you know, whoever you are, you have a place in our organization. Inclusivity type stuff. Okay, Reaper says, and along those lines, it gets into the messaging of every participant in the technological society, winking at each other that they aren't kind of forced to play along because they have no choice. Right, so it's like we're inclusive. Look, you could express yourself. I think that's well put by Reaper. And he says, not that I agree with this worldview per se, just that I think this analysis is what would fit with the conversation. Yeah, so we could say that that's what they're trying to do. That's what's being expressed by the artwork. Whether or not they succeed in convincing people of that, that's a different question. But it seems that's what they're trying to do. Okay, it looks like this might be an example of this sort of corporate art from Google, just to look at another. So once again, the faces and stuff, very abstract, but you do see diversity in the sense like this person looks kind of like a Sikh person, maybe wearing a turban with a beard. It's kind of like a liberal hipster looking guy, and then a woman with a big tech Zuckerberg style jacket. Maybe she's a top developer at Google. Who knows? Okay. Corporate art. All right. Next note here. So, mass society. Jacques was saying that the psychological work has to make people fall into mass society so they could do things like go into assembly lines. Beyond that, the world is characterized in pretty Darwinistic sounding terms. So let me read this quote. The fundamental rule of the world today is the rule of economic, political, and class competition. And this competition extends to the social and human relationships of friendship and sex. The disequilibrium between the traditional affirmation and the new criterion has produced the climate of anxiety and insecurity characteristic of our epoch and of our neuroses, and corresponds exactly to the distinction between the individualist society and the mass society. So I think it's not necessarily Darwinistic, like killing people overtly, but it is in, like, if you arrange the world kind of like a game. So competition implies like winners and losers. So as opposed to just everybody doing things, cooperating together, we all win together. I think there is a lot of sense of like competition as a sort of zero-sum game in the technological society. Okay, Reaper says, so perhaps there was a subtle thing. There was a time when sharp vector spline graphics or a new thing in 1980s desktop publishing and digital illustration software. All right, let's happily get distracted by Reaper's art note because I like art. Vector spline graphics. Okay. So to what extent the corp art is kind of showing off the power of software technology to make that stuff in a new digital way. Oh, seems legit. Yeah, so just for those of you who have never done vector graphics before, if you do, I'll just change this to vector graphics rather than like a digital photograph, which will just be a bunch of pixels. A vector art is defined in a particular way. So you define like the lines, the fill in the shapes, all that sort of stuff. And what this means is because you have a precise definition of the graphic that you're making, it would be easy, for example, if you had this vector graphic and this guy's hair, it's all defined as one shape, then it's really easy to program it to do something like change the color of that guy's hair. In fact, let us give a plug for our friend Xa Li again, because now I'm remembering that Xa Li does a lot of things, but one thing he did was he was programming vectors by hand. And no, this is like math. I should search Xa Li SVG. Yeah, let's look at his practical SVG tutorial. We'll look at. Okay, yeah, so you could like literally define images with like code. So here, Xa Li, he did this by hand. He defined this little lemon juice bowl, and then tweaked some numbers to make it bend and stuff. So it has a formal definition in the code. Oh, and he made this tool where you could even drag these sliders to see how toggling these various values, they manipulate the vector graphic that gets rendered there. So pretty cool thing by Xa Li there to demonstrate how SVG graphics work. You write code and you do stuff. We're bringing this up because looking at corporate art and stuff, I was thinking that maybe one of the reasons that the art has that sort of style is because it's a vector graphic or some kind of this character where you could use code to basically generate more art. Okay, Reaper says so to that extent, the corp art is kind of showing off the power of software technology to make that stuff in a new digital way. Yeah, it makes sense. Metaphorical equivalent would kind of be if the corp art of the 2020s became 3D avatars from the metaverse. And then he has a link, which I cannot, it's hiding part of the link. I would click on your link, but it's kind of hard to do. Okay, these people are showing there was a corporate hippie art style of the 1960s. You know what? Maybe it'll work. I'll try clicking your link. Are you sure you want to leave YouTube? Okay, I'm risking it. You better not be trolling me. Okay, so perhaps we might say that modern corp art in 2021 is kind of third derivative of this, where none of the creators even realize it. Okay, let's show the hippie art. Yeah, I think too. Also, what's his face? Andy Warhol. But look at the art of somebody like Andy Warhol, with this famous image. So a lot of the maybe ideas that are being explored by this image is, of course, pop culture, that sort of thing, but also reproducing and variations on the same thing using rather automatic techniques of some kind. So here, looking at this hippie art, yet sharing in the colorful aspects of the corporate art, and similar ideas of just happy people wear, different hairstyles. Toujours à la moda. Get with it. And then they're cooking some food. Chirp, chirp. Oh, did they invent Twitter before us? A game about happiness? In any case, look, our art of various periods, I think, is a very educational way to understand what sorts of things people are trying to express in various periods. Okay, Reaper says they call your corp art vector minimalism. And he gives me another link to click. All right, let's do it. Let's live dangerously. Go to this site. Okay, so vector, as we were showing with the Xali site, implies it's programmable. So let's look at the gallery of vector minimalism. Yes, a lot of these corporate logos, haha fun, taco, all these things. And the feature of the vector minimalism would be you could create these images which scale perfectly because they're mathematically defined. It's like you define a circle, all the points equidistant from a point. That's the definition of a circle. Now you could expand and contract a circle infinitely. The same cannot be said of like a digital photograph or so-called raster graphics. Raster graphics are not, they're like approximations. You see with the pixels that are defining that, so it only looks good at a certain size. Whereas the vector graphics, they could expand infinitely. Okay, cool. Art History Hour was fun. Let us continue though. So, competition, kind of zero-sum gamey existence in the technological society. And then another quote, but to become a masked man entails a tremendous effort of psychic mutation. The purpose of techniques which have man as their object, the so-called human techniques, is to assist him in his mutation, to help him find the quickest way to calm his fears and reshape his heart and his brain. Whoa, that sounds pretty packed. But as you could see, if you have this very hyper-competitive world, climate of anxiety and insecurity, then what do you do with people? How could people handle this? And I will just mention, like, just growing up, going to school and stuff, I went to a fairly competitive high school. A lot of people wanted to go to top universities and stuff. There's a strong sense, like, I need to study hard to be the top of my class. It really does number on people in terms of anxiety and insecurity. So these psychological factors are no joke here. Okay, let's continue. Reaper says, you just made a big point kind of along the medium as the message lines. So medium is message. That's an allusion to Marshall McLuhan, a media theorist. We might have to look more at him later. I.e., modern symbology needs to scale from emoji to iPhone icon to Desktop to billboard. Okay, so Reaper's talking again about vector graphics and about how these images we have, they need to be able to scale at various sizes to be projected in various places. Vector art does this in a way other art doesn't. Yes. And also emphasize that vector art is math underneath, i.e. technology. You could mention Nuth and Metafont. Well, Reaper was probably fonts. So fonts that aren't displayed just as like pixels, just little squares, but instead people that define fonts based on paths. So that is why if you're using a font, you could scale infinitely. Okay, well, enough talk about that. Let's look at a sample. Okay, so here the text probably looks pretty clear. Now I'm going to zoom in. Now because these letters are defined as vectors, as paths, then you see even as I zoom in a whole bunch, then the letters, they still look crisp. It doesn't get pixelated like if you were to zoom in on a raster photograph. Instead, you could clearly see that. So because fonts are vectors, you could easily create large billboards and stuff with text, like sign printers, and people have been doing this for a long time. So that would be an example of an earlier application of how vectors became popular as they appeared in fonts. And another place you probably have seen this is, especially as phone screen resolutions and stuff have gotten better, then you'll want the screen to make the best use of the screen to look as good as it can. So these, like the so-called Retina displays, just search it up, Retina display. If you have an Apple store or whatever near you, check out one of their high-end fancy MacBooks. Okay, so here's the example. Here's the non-Retina display. You see all the pixels, all those things. And then the Retina display, the letters and all that will look much sharper, much better. So if you have like fonts, so people read text all the time on their computer, stuff like that, then looking at the fonts is one clear way in which you could see the strength of something like a Retina display and how it makes things look nice. So interesting point brought up by our friend Reaper. Okay. So mass society, you gotta find your place. You gotta fit into the technological society. So how does that happen? Quote, "It is remarkable that mass participation distracts the individual from his miseries and even dispels them. After all, the process of massification was itself the origin of man's psychic difficulties." So problem, technological society, very difficult to have people accept this thing. So what do? Ironically, through massification, putting them in the same program, then people like this in the sense that their miseries turn into something else by participating in this. And we will look at how this is so. Okay, continuing to quote. "Research, therefore, has taken two directions. It has concerned itself with making the interests of man and technique correspond, thus rendering technique flexible." So what the company's having you do and what you want, if those two are in line, then you could be motivated because your objectives align. "It has also attempted to take human nature into account in order to keep man from being crushed by technique, thereby becoming an obstacle to technique. On both these counts, there has been an unceasing effort to refine our knowledge of human techniques in order to bridge the gap between man and technique." So, yeah, you can't just make people work forever. If people are totally miserable, psychologically destroyed, then they're not going to be very good workers. They're not going to be good technicians, people who could apply technique. So how do you keep people going psychologically? quote, "Tomorrow it might be in technique's interest to exploit man brutally, to mutilate and suppress him. We have, as of now, no guarantee whatsoever that this is not the road it will take. On the contrary, we see all around us at least as many signs of increasing contempt for man as respect for him. Technique mixes the one with the other indiscriminately. The only law it follows is that of its own autonomous development." So talking about how technique develops more technique, technique autonomously develops more technique. You try to optimize for efficiency and make systems that optimize for efficiency, well, they're just going to go right ahead and keep on doing it. Okay, to me, therefore, it seems impossible to speak of technical humanism. Right, so if you can't talk about technique respecting people, so it's sort of humanism, then the alternative, right, is to change humans in order to make them more compatible with technique. So, how is this done? One area that this is done that Ellul goes over in his book is education. So, he talks briefly here about the goals of progressive education. And then here, this quote talks about the goals of it. So, the problem is to put the child in the best possible situation and to prepare him optimally for the tasks that await him. So, going back just this general psychology topic, to be most efficient, you can't totally ruin people because then they just won't work or won't be able to work, something like that. So with progressive education, technique de l'école nouvelle has as its end the happiness of the child and entails bright classrooms, understanding teachers, and pleasurable work. Its educational formulas are well known. The child in school must be relaxed to enjoy himself. He must exist in a balanced environment, get rid of his complexes, and play while he is learning. So that sounds all fine and good. I would say that even now, these sorts of techniques, right, we see them being applied not just to children, but to adults. Like one of the words that you could look at is the so-called gamification. So gamification is this idea, let's get people to have fun while learning by turning various learning things you might want to do into a game. So you get like very clearly defined objectives, fixed rewards, and so on and so forth. Then people are motivated to succeed, and the goal is that you're able to learn effortlessly just because what are you doing? Oh, I'm just playing games. So looking at how kids learn, right, kids might learn all sorts of stuff just playing, then why can't that also be applied with adults, right? This similar sort of idea going on. Okay, so we have a big word here. Ellul's talking about psychopedagogic technique. So big word, pedagogy having to do with teaching. So psychology, pedagogy, psychology and teaching blending together in a technique. So a quote, "We note again the aggressive character of technique. Mademoiselle Montessori emphasizes the fact that it is necessary to free the child from the slavery of school and family, for him to enter the cycle of freedom proper to his technique. However, this freedom consists in a profound and detailed surveillance of the child's activity, a complete shaping of his spiritual life, and a precise regulation of his time with a stopwatch. In short, in habituating him to a joyful serfdom. The most important aspect of this technique is the forced orientation towards it. It is a social force directed towards a social end." So this quote and this section was interesting to me because basically if education could end up being like a data-driven, personalized education where people are playing video games and automatically learning, then that would be the sort of ideal education system for the technological society. Now, we could see a lot of this stuff is being developed already. So I'm just going to naively do a search for personalized education, and let's see what sort of results come up. Okay, personalized learning. Let's look at what this is about. Okay, and of course, this stuff's all being presented positively, like this is good for you, happy people. Okay, personalized learning. What do you need to know? Personalized learning is an educational approach that aims to customize learning for each student's strengths, needs, skills, and interests. Each student gets a learning plan that is based on what they know and how they learn best. So how do you get that? It's a whole bunch of data-driven stuff. And then some mentions of some other things. And then they have a thing to help you select a product. I am a educator and want to help with my students focus and attention, distance learning, and everyday skills. All right, let's find resources. Recommended for you. And then they're telling me about this psychological concept, working memory. They have some links to some other things. Anyways, as you could see, a bunch of web programming stuff going on here, drop-down menus and all these things. The idea is with a lot of data and stuff, you could have more personalized curriculums for people. So this is a big money approach that's being developed all over the place. Like here's an NPR article. Let's take a look. Oh, and we got some corporate art to boot. So this is relevant and fun. Okay, the future of learning. Well, it's personal. And this is from 2018. Here's a person skiing in VR. Person cooking while looking at a tablet. Some blue girl, purple girl looking at a bicycle. Some dude sitting at a table doing some coloring. If you do a Google image search for classroom, you'll mostly see one familiar scene, groups or rows of desks, blah, blah, blah. And then they talk about how, right, you could evolve school into a personalized system. Students are receiving instruction exactly at the point they need it. And of course, one teacher can't run around and give personalized instruction, so automated stuff, videos, all these things will, of course, play a big part in there. Here's gamification, a happy-looking guy, competency-based education. Looks like he's winning all these rewards. Kind of looks like a military dictator with that. But we won't comment further on the aesthetics there. Okay, sports games, ways to motivate people. Citing Khan Academy as an example. You can show mastery by getting a certain number of questions right in a row. So all these sorts of gamification metrics. Interest-driven education. Person with a snake. I guess they're supposed to be learning like Python programming or something. That's why there's a snake. Self-efficacy. So more psychobabble words. Oh, and then we have a unicycle, a bicycle, and a tricycle, because differentiation. Stuff's different. People are different. Okay, back to Ellul. So, psychopedagogical technique, what is the form that this will take? It'll be, right, personalized education that feels like play. That's the ideal. So, here's a quote from Jacques Ellul's book. What looks like the apex of humanism is in fact the pinnacle of human submission. Children are educated to become precisely what society expects of them. They must have social consciences that allow them to strive for the same ends as society sets for itself. Clearly, when modern youth are fully educated, the new psychopedagogic technique, many social and political difficulties will disappear. So it's like if everybody learns to code and we're all just computer nerds, then, wouldn't that be great for the technological society? It's like everybody is just working on fixing software and collaborating all day, Then, all violence, it's all totally neutralized. We should all just be like computer nerds and program robot farms. Then, it would be great. So that's kind of the utopian sort of dream one might have with this sort of thing. And I wanted to bring up that there's a big push for STEM, that is science, technology, engineering, math, in the USA today. People, of course, will often point to other nations saying, like, the USA is lagging behind in STEM. Look at China and India and Singapore and South Korea, wherever you're pointing at. And you'll say, we don't have enough STEM in the United States. Now, you could ask, essentially, what are STEM-type jobs? And the answer would be, it's a lot of these technician-type roles. It would be, who are the people that build out and operate the technological society? It would be STEM people a lot of the time. All right, a quote. A survey conducted by Le Monde in 1952 began with the words, "There are too many half-baked intellectuals and not enough technicians. It would be useless to multiply such references. They are literally infinite in number since they express everybody's feeling in the matter. Instruction must be useful in life. Today's life is technique. It follows then that instruction must above all else be technical." So I think this is a common notion still today. If you go around and you talk to people about work and education, what sort of things we'll hear? It's like, well, oh yeah, that major sounds good. It'd be good for a job. That major, maybe it won't help you get a job. So a lot of it has to do with whether or not your education is useful in your capacity to become a technician of some sort. So if you choose something like, as an undergrad, I did philosophy. It's like, I'm a philosophy major. Well, that might raise some eyebrows, raise some concern, because people might be like, oh, how does studying philosophy put you into the technological society? Of course, they don't frame it like that, but that would be one way to express the nature of that concern, that choosing certain paths, it doesn't seem like you are preparing yourself well to fulfill a technical role. Okay, so what are the people studying the arts, humanities, and so on? What are they doing? And the bolds here are by me. Jacques Ellul writes, "The intelligentsia will no longer be a model, a conscience, or an animating intellectual spirit for the group." So you're not being the philosopher king of Plato. You're not doing that, even in the sense of performing a critical function. They will be the servants, the most conformist imaginable of the instruments of technique. So essentially, you study the arts, the writings, etc. If you go into like a big corporate job, you're basically going to be making propaganda. Like that will be your job. If you're like you go to art school, then Google might hire you to make big tech vector art. Like that's the sort of thing that you'll be doing if you choose those sorts of paths and then try to advance within the corporate world or the state world, doing something that's related to what you studied. Or you might, just like me, just don't do something that's directly related, or go rogue, make a YouTube channel, unpack the secrets of propaganda, symbols, technology, and languages, and share it with the world for free. So yes, welcome to the stream. Hope you're enjoying it. Continuing. So section, the technique of work. Ellul describes how work changed with new machines and factories optimized for maximum output. However, workers would get tired by schemes of maximum exploitation. What's to be done? Okay, so that was just me summarizing what's going on. Quote by Jacques Ellul. "It became necessary to recognize the primacy of the whole human being, to adapt the work to the man, and to take the worker's psychological equilibrium in consideration. It goes without saying that the motive force behind all this was the recognition that human psychology reacts directly upon productivity." So once again, how does all this human stuff, psychology, how does this fit into talking about the technological society? Well, the state that people are in affects the sort of work that they could do, and also how will they integrate into the technological society. And as a example of that, like even before the technological society, you could see how like a master of a slave, they would want the slaves to be in good enough health that they could actually do work for them. If you had a bunch of slaves and they couldn't even do work for you, then what good is that? That's totally economically, it doesn't make sense. I'll put it that way. In the same way, us, right, to the system, subjected to the system, we have to be happy enough, content enough, at least that we keep on going, that we could provide for this thing. Okay, a quote. Purely material transformations in the conditions of labor are insufficient. They are doubtless necessary to begin with, but physiological adaptation is not the only kind. Hygiene and safety must indeed be improved. The best location must be selected, and even music may be exploited to make labor more rhythmic and less disagreeable. But this is still not enough. The true problem is psychological. The worker is confronted by cut-and-dry procedures that must be carried out in unvarying sequences in order that work be systematic, rational, and efficient. He is bored, slowed down, and psychologically constrained. It is necessary to arouse in him reflective thought and to make him participate in the life of the entire plant. He must be made to feel a community of interests. The idea that his labor has social meaning must be instilled in him. Ooh. So when I read this, I thought of this whole idea of corporate culture. Now, there's this YouTuber who specializes in what he calls corporate cringe. That is this fellow, Joshua Fluke. If you go and you look at his channel, he compiles some very interesting videos. Let's see if he has a playlist on. We'll just look at some of his popular uploads and skip past his personal drama. Anyways, one thing that he does is he actually calls employers and sort of does, you could say, sort of journalism, field research on the corporate world, basically looking at corporate culture, things like that. So looking at how corporations treat people. So one thing he does is he'll review the corporate propaganda, basically, that various companies will put out to market their stuff, to show how cool it is to work at their company. And then he'll basically say this is totally lame. So here, as an example, it looks like some company is making a kind of they're trying to be fun, cool, hip, to have a party of some kind. Right, they're trying to have these quirky, fun portraits. Here, it's an example he's showing. Corporate birthday celebrations. They hired a mariachi band. And some employees doing the floss dance. Another sort of activity that's supposed to be a kind of fun team building thing. So he'll just show how people, they seem very awkward and forced and all this. And yeah, he makes a lot of these videos kind of ragging on corporate stuff. He calls it corporate cringe is his thing. So if you look at Joshua Fluke and you look at all his corporate cringe videos, you'll see a lot of things of that character. Anyways, I bring that up because this mass culture that's being discussed, one of the things that they're saying that the technique that's being used is basically to engineer a kind of culture at work, a kind of it's not just you doing work. How do we make work more interesting? Well, let us make work more than work, and in that way, work becomes more interesting. So what does corporate culture include? Well, one of the things that's necessary for corporate culture is you want to control attitude. So you at a corporation, it's probably, if you're watching Joshua Fluke, a lot of companies probably wouldn't be very happy about that because it shows, you don't believe in the company mission, you don't have the right corporate spirit or something. Here's a quote. It is inadmissible that the workers' reading matter should occasion slowdowns, rebellion, or displacement of the center of interest. Such things are unthinkable, whatever the regime. Culture must conform to technique and encourage productivity. Censorship in this area ought therefore not to be regarded as an evil, but as an unavoidable condition of objective technique. So just to go off this a little bit, like in workplaces, I've had the experience where, depending what job you're doing, let's say safety so much isn't a factor. So maybe an office job, you're not going to get hit by a forklift or something. Will the company let you listen to music? That might be a question. Well, some companies, it might say like, yeah, we let people listen to just music because it might help people stay motivated and do their work better. But then if they found like somebody listening to music or something, being distracted and slacking off, or maybe like someone's listening to Joe Rogan podcasts and, they're just looking up jujitsu videos all day or something, then suddenly this might become unacceptable. So maybe music okay, but video or podcast not okay. Something like that. You could get different policies in different places. Reaper says, Elon says listening to music is okay for Tesla factory workers. I've heard, I was talking to a guy who works for, he worked for Amazon warehouse. He said at Amazon warehouses, you're probably just doing a lot of move box here, move box there, tape this, scan this, things like that. I guess they're able to listen to music as well. So a lot of places, right, music could be very helpful. That would be okay. Now, if you pulled out a tablet, put it there, and you were watching like Alex Jones or something, then maybe they wouldn't like that. I don't know. All right, continuing. Lowell continues mentioning counselors. So these are my own notes. Nowadays, we have mental health care professionals and others to help people cope with the technological society. So once again, it's like, what are the various quote-unquote nice things or perks that you might have at work? It's like, oh, at my work, it's nice because we get to listen to music, or like they provide me with counseling services, right? To a person, these things might seem like nice concessions, but you could also think about it from the top-down perspective. Then, these things could actually be very helpful too for the company, for your boss, for whoever, in that if you are able to find a place to fit better, then everybody wins insofar as they want the technological society to do its thing. So here's a quote. The technique of so-called human relations developed to adapt the individual to the technical milieu, to force him to accept slavery, to make him find happiness by the normalization of his relations with his group, and integrate him into that group to an even greater degree. This technique is characteristic of the fakeries and shams which men must be provided if the conflicts provoked by life in a technicized environment are to be avoided. As a remedy, it does not amount to much, but as a symptom of technical reinforcement, it is important. They alleviate the rigors of the human condition, but only by forcing men to submit to them completely. And then Ellul goes on to describe human relations techniques as delusions, lies to lubricate the technological society. So I think Jacques Ellul went pretty hard, basically saying that this is kind of like Plato's, you could say, the noble lie. What is the noble lie? In politics, a noble lie is a myth or untruth, often but not invariably of a religious nature, knowingly propagated by an elite to maintain social harmony, or to advance an agenda. So this is sounding like human relations, HR department, whatever. They might use a sort of noble lie in order to make things run more smoothly. And then my notes here, labor unions are described as a technical administration. Okay, so Ellul is like addressing how this isn't like a right-wing, free market, left-wing concern. Rather, it's more about to what extent is this society technological societied. And here he's describing how labor unions too, you could look at how they're a technique And he says to make the worker more organizable. So capitalist versus communist, whatever, these distinctions, they don't actually really matter that much. They're just different names. But the real way in which you're seeing societies change and evolve is along this technical axis. Okay, next section on vocational guidance. So people choosing how they fit in this. Let's read a quote. Vocational guidance then has the task of adapting the individual, their education, to planned manpower requirements. So the technological society will have certain roles for people to fill. Now, how do we fill those roles? Vocational guidance is thus subordinated to planning technique. It institutes forthwith a twofold operation of general education focused on the particular trade and on the psychic, mechanical, and physiological adaptation of candidates. The plan thus obtains the necessary manpower. The individual candidates are effectively adapted to the required labor. The emphasis, again, is on ensuring the happiness of the individual through adaptation. The exception is that the individual will be happy when he is synchronized with his trade. So, once again, technological society, the human problem, okay? You have this very unnatural system. So, how do you make people more compatible with it? Well, one way is if you help people choose an appropriate spot that is more aligned with how they are, then that could be an effective way to help integrate people into the technological society. And my own note, I was just remarking that you could see how a lot of this vocational guidance stuff in recent times, one might say it's kind of epic failed. You get a lot of college graduates, probably most of them, working jobs that don't have anything to do with their university training. So insofar as people are being trained to if you look at university education as vocational school, which I know especially like liberal arts people, a lot of people will argue that that's not the purpose of it. That issue aside, just saying if we consider a lot of the education that we're giving as sort of a vocational school kind of thing, in many cases it's quite unsuccessful in guiding people into their roles, unless you're working at Starbucks with a master's degree might actually be what had been designed. Don't ask me, ask a society planner. Okay. A quote, in isolation from certain other techniques, vocational guidance is useless. Put back into its true context, it becomes simply a means for subordinating man to the requirements of economic technique. Yeah, so essentially what it is, if you're an expert in vocational guidance, your expertise is only valuable insofar as you have this framework of the technological society and roles to put people in. If that society collapsed or whatever, then your knowledge is useless because you're a specialized in growing the system by placing people in it, basically. Okay, next section on propaganda. Quote from Ellul. The prime consideration is the union of two very different categories of technique which yield this new system of human technique. The first is a complex of mechanical techniques, principally radio, press, and motion pictures, which permit direct communication with a very large number of persons collectively, while simultaneously addressing each individual in the group. These techniques possess an extraordinary power of persuasion and a remarkable capacity to bring psychic and intellectual pressure to bear. The second category consists of a complex psychological and even psychoanalytical techniques which give access to exact knowledge of the human psyche. Okay, so what role does propaganda, and Jacques Ellul under propaganda, he includes media like film, television, radio, stuff like that. What role does this play in the technological society? So Ellul talks about how fun, things we might just think of as fun, they're useful because they condition people to be a certain way psychologically. Okay, another quote. Propaganda must be as natural as air or food. It must proceed by psychological inhibition and the least possible shock. The individual is then able to declare in all honesty that no such thing as propaganda exists. In fact, however, he has been so absorbed by it that he literally is no longer able to see the truth. So that's just say, when most Americans, like I'm in America, I know you go and you watch a movie or something, it's like, oh yeah, it's just the preview looked cool. I'm seeing a movie. People don't say like, I'm going to my propaganda update session. You know, I need to go to the movie theaters so that I could better cope with the miseries of the technological society. You know, people don't say that. Instead, it's like, I'm going to the movies. Why? Oh, yeah, it's a fun thing to do on a Friday. Whatever. Or you're watching Netflix or something. It's like, why are you watching Netflix? It's like, oh yeah, it's a long day at work, just unwinding. I'll just find something to watch. Okay. So, let's see what else we have here. Technique thus creates a separation between all absolutely good persons who are collectively justified and who represent political, social, and historic virtue, and all absolutely evil persons in whom no worth or virtue is to be found. So we could think about how film, movies, radio, these things, right? They help create these narratives about who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, who is on the wrong side of history. So let's just look at some movies. Let's look at some movie posters. Let's go to Amazon Movies and TV and just take a brief look at what's showing here. So these are the sorts of stories that are popular, that should be, you know, good or fine for you to watch. If it's on Amazon front page, it's totally approved to enjoy that media. So let's see. James Bond, No Time to Die. What's it about? A mission to rescue a kidnapped scientist turns out to be far more treacherous than expected, leading Bond, Daniel Craig, onto the trail of a mysterious villain armed with dangerous new technology. Woo. So note here, this plot's got a bunch of technology involved. Yeah, I think all the Bond films have a bunch of technology involved, but yeah, kidnapped scientists. So just intrigue around technology, science, big stuff like that. So it's okay to get pumped, get excited, and enjoy stories about secret agents, feds, science, intrigue. Interesting. Venom, Let There Be Carnage. What is that about? Tom Hardy returns to the big screen as the lethal protector Venom, one of Marvel's greatest and most complex characters. In search of his next big story, journalist Eddie Brock lands an exclusive interview with convicted murderer and death row inmates Cletus Cassidy, Woody Harrelson, who discovers Eddie's secret and becomes a host for Carnage, a menacing and terrifying symbiote. So it's totally cool to just spend your time and thinking about journalists doing interesting, heroic things and weird monsters and possession. That's cool and fine for you to think about, as long as you happily enjoy it as fiction. So, interesting. Okay, so what does propaganda do? Movies, television, all these things. We'll list out 3 key effects here, which we'll look at. So, first, the critical faculty has been suppressed by the creation of collective passions. So you could think about messaging to have people think thoughts like, we're all in this together. So propaganda might be a technique by people identifying with a group, mass culture, once again. Like, oh yeah, we're all fighting a common enemy. Like, you know, we're all against, I don't know, combating extremism, something like that. Then you get everybody lowering their critical faculty in order to enjoy that sort of participation. 2, a good social conscience appears with the suppression of the critical faculty. So For example, you might be thinking like, I'm doing my part. I changed my Facebook profile picture using the custom Facebook profile border thing, and therefore I have good social conscience. A third, propaganda technique, moreover, creates a new sphere of the sacred. So certain people who are outside of criticism. So for example, it's just like, we can't criticize Alan because he's Chinese American, and then it'll be like we're targeting him because we're associating his people with having eaten bats and created diseases or something. So Alan is immune from all criticism. You might have a thought like that because of propaganda technique. Reaper asks, do they use propaganda? Yeah, of course. They employ lots of propaganda. Okay, another quote. A second consequence of the application of propaganda techniques is the creation of a kind of manipulability of the masses. Here again, Monero gives a definition worth repeating. According to Monero, propaganda technique has for its object the production and cultivation among the masses of certain predispositions and a special facility for doing at a given moment whatever is strategically opportune. The individual, his soul massaged, empties of his natural tendencies and thoroughly assimilated to the group, is ready for anything. Propaganda chief requirement is not so much to be rational, well-grounded, and powerful as it is to produce individuals especially open to suggestion who can be easily set into motion. So it's like, when we say jump, jump, and if everybody jumps when you said jump, then that's like an example of what total success might look like. One interesting thing that jump line I just said reminded me of is this whole idea of like flash mobs. So think about this, like you get people knowing how to do certain dances, and then it's just like you play a signal, like a certain song comes on, and then suddenly people break out into a flash mob. Then, I'm not saying that this stuff is necessarily bad. I don't know that much about it. But to be able to have people like literally move and step how you like, right? This is a top tier application of being a master of propaganda. Because, you could look at this and say, like, don't these people, they look kind of goofy, Yet they're literally dancing the dance that they're told. They say jump, song cue or whatever, and then they jump. And I want to just bring up this infamous Grubhub ad, the delivery dance. So this thing became kind of a meme because it's like, is this what the companies think of us? Is this you? Let's turn on the sound. Okay, well, I won't play the whole thing as to not get copyright violation, but that's just to say, right, these such things like flash mob dance, whatever, you could see how they're an expression of mass culture. And it could be a way where, like, literally it's like when I say jump or I give the symbol for jump, then everybody jumps, right? What sort of conditioning is necessary to go into that sort of thing? So here, propaganda's chief requirement is not so much rational, well-grounded, and powerful as it is to produce individuals especially open to suggestion who can easily be set into motion. So literally we just looked at how literally set into motion could look. But you could look at all sorts of other things, like, we tell everybody to go and get this treatment, everybody does that treatment. We tell everybody to stay away from this area, they stay away from that area. Whatever it is, right? It doesn't have to be dancing at a flash mob. You could look at all sorts of things that people might be asked to do. Okay, continuing. So this Armin Robin person, Ellul quotes him, he came up with this idea of verbal universe. And the quote goes, "Men fashion images of things, events, and people which may not reflect reality, but which are truer than reality. These images are based on news items, which, as is the case in much of the world, are faked. Their purpose is to form rather than inform. Faking the news is systematically practiced by the Soviet radio, but the procedure is found to a lesser degree in all countries." So you talk about a thing enough, then people start to think it's a thing. Like, is it a thing? Well, they said it's a thing, so it's a thing. It's the they, it's the them again. They're saying it's a thing, so it's a thing. Okay, what is the verbal universe used for? And a quote, "Man will be led to act from real motives that are scientifically directed." And scientifically here is being used in the sense that there's people that are collecting a bunch of data, so they know what behaviors will be like. That's the sense in which it's scientific. Okay, so scientifically directed and increasingly irresistible. He'll be brought to sacrifice himself in a real world, but for the sake of the verbal universe, which has been fashioned for him, he must try to grasp the profundity of this upheaval. We must try to grasp the profundity of this upheaval. The human being has enormous means at his disposal, and he acts upon and in the real world. But he acts in a dream. He seeks other ends, those the incantational magic of propaganda proposes for him, than those he will really attain. The ends as he is expected to reach are known only to the manipulators of the mass subconscious, and to them alone. Oh, it's that pesky them. So, if you have really effective propaganda, you say words, then you tell people, like, oh yeah, you have to go here. Why? For national security. You have to go here. Why? To protect your freedoms. You have to go here. Why? Because Q willed it. I don't know. Whatever it is. If you have effective propaganda, then you create this verbal universe. You just talk. You say things enough, and through the power of memes, whatever you want to call the verbal universe that's being created, you could do all sorts of stuff if you are the manipulators of mass subconscious. Is this happening to me? Quote, "At this point, the reader will protest that our analysis may apply to others but not to him. But if he listens regularly to the radio, reads the newspaper, and goes to the movies, the description does fit him. He will not be aware of it because the essence of propaganda is to act upon the human subconscious, but to leave men the illusion of complete freedom." So let's just look at one aspect in which you do exercise freedom. So, for example, watching TV, all these things, a lot of times we're doing these activities in our free time. So we are actively choosing and inviting to have these influences in our lives. So people, it's not like you're being strapped to a chair and being like made to watch something against your will. Rather, a lot of the time, especially for like working people, then you are willfully choosing to subject this stuff. You pay money to go to a movie. So how could it be propaganda if I'm like actively choosing this for myself? Whereas if you're like, oh yeah, they make all the students sit down and like watch a PSA or a educational film or something, maybe people might more readily see how that could be propaganda. But what about the things on like Netflix, Amazon Movies, or whatever? Would most people think of that as propaganda, or is it just, something that's fun? Ask yourself. Do we have this at work in the USA? Writing in 1954, Ellul states, "Some democracies do not exploit the propaganda arsenal simply because they cannot afford to do so." So maybe like poor country at this point, they don't even have radio and television going, so they simply can't do it as well. Maybe the population's not literate, so even if you circulated newspapers and stuff, it wouldn't do you any good because the people wouldn't be able to read it. So, like, in those societies, right, these techniques wouldn't be as effective. Others, like the United States, exploited only to a limited degree during certain restricted periods. For example, during wars, hot and, this should have been cold, not gold, hot and cold, and only in certain areas. However, such restraint cannot be imputed to democratic scruples. These democracies simply do not feel the compelling necessity to exploit propagandistic technique. So if people are already just doing everything you want, eating up what you're telling them to do, then you don't need to pull extra levers and expand the resources and things to make them do stuff. However, if people aren't doing what you want, then it might be necessary to pull some more tricks out of your hat. Reaper says, can you talk about the difference between propaganda and politicians just lying? Let's see. Well, I mean, I'll give my personal views. I think politicians, let's assume they're actually people. They're not just metaverse avatars or something. I'm just assuming that politicians are actually people. So, of course, if a politician lies, then that would mean that they believe something to be true, but then they're saying something that isn't true. Or you could do so-called lie by omission, where somebody asks you a question and you dodge it. You refuse to say something that you know, so a person could choose not to speak the truth. In that case, the agency of the politician is like right there at that moment. They're exercising their agency to deliberately misrepresent. On the other hand, I think that a lot of the propaganda stuff, you don't even have to have somebody lie. If somebody truly believes in the propaganda, the messages that they're saying, then they might be relaying these things, not trying to deceive or trick anybody, but if they have actually internalized and believed those messages themselves, they don't even see themselves as doing propaganda. So I think, like, for example, what I call most like grade school teachers, I say, "Oh, you're a liar." No, you're not. They're not. I wouldn't say that they're lying. They probably believe what they're saying. I don't know. You could ask them. But are they being propagandists? Well, I mean, in the sense that they have to use certain textbooks, they have to relay certain messages. Like, yeah, I think definitely you could say that they're propagandists in that capacity, that they're pushing down like establishment approved messages. I mean, that's as we're looking at here in the section about education, like that's what they do. Likewise, PR press release people. I think a lot of the times, right, like a person that's doing a press release newscast or something, they might read off a teleprompter, they might have a prepared statement, they're just delivering a message. So it's like, hey bro, don't shoot the messenger. So a person might be delivering propaganda, but does that mean that a person's lying? I would say no. I mean, it could lying, I think, is a very distinct and different thing, and a lot of people could be caught up in some aspect of machinery passing down stuff, and if they're unaware, they truly believe it, whatever's going on, then I would not call that person a liar so much as like if what they're saying was wrong, it just means that they might be deceived rather than them lying, something like that. Okay, Reaper says, and can you talk about the differences between people promoting certain theories like capitalism or say universal health care versus when promoting something becomes propaganda? What makes propaganda different? And is the difference the specific techniques used when professionals engage in propaganda? Ooh, that's a kind of tough one to pick out with terms. I mean, I'll just talk about stuff that I wouldn't consider propaganda first. So if we're just talking, like I'm telling you, hey, I read this and this is what I think about that, then I think we're just having a conversation about stuff. Or I saw something firsthand, I'm telling you about what I saw, then that's not propaganda, and it's just me reporting on what I saw, me trying to figure things out. So I wouldn't call that a propaganda. Now, if you have some sort of ideological program or something, like let's say I'm trying to convince you of a particular political theory, and I start saying like talking points about why, you know, McGovernment good or McGovernment bad, something like that, then I would say you might actually be doing like, I don't know, libertarian propaganda for free just by like quoting and saying like Mises Institute stuff, right? So somebody might be doing that. They don't think that they're engaging in sort of propagandistic stuff, but what they're doing is, they're on their own volition, like promoting and extending ideas that isn't like you just having a conversation with a person. It's like you're broadcasting a program. So let's see. So yeah, when people are doing something like promoting universal health care, promoting capitalism, something like that, I guess I would define like a propaganda as being, it has to be some sort of like top-down effort. So there has to be a campaign that's trying to get some effect. So it's a technique, right? So what would the technique be? Aiming to optimize. So let's say your goal is to get more acceptance of universal health care, something like that. So insofar as the way you're acting is to try to shift public perception. So if you did a survey, universal health care approval or something would go up, and your then that's kind of a form of propaganda. In fact, let us actually just look at the word of propaganda. I believe it's the same as like propagation, so spreading some message. Oh, Reaper pulls up a dictionary. Propaganda is information, especially of a biased or misleading nature used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. Yeah, so that's often how the word propaganda is used. But let's look for New Latin, propaganda, short for Congregatio de Propaganda Fide, congregation for promoting the faith. So I'll go and say like, propaganda is some kind of promoting something. And oftentimes propaganda is used in a derogatory tone, like, oh, that's just propaganda, that's bad. But insofar as like something is good and is worth promoting, so for example, today, like you could say Alan did some canola oil bad propaganda. Alan did some seed oil bad propaganda. I'm not going to deny that I did some like seed oil bad propaganda. I did plug a message about that, and I was extending a message about how you might not want to consume seed oils because they might not be very good for you. Okay, Reaper says, so sometime in the last few decades the idea of spin or a spin master got popular. Yeah, so I think like propaganda, promoting ideas, stuff like this, it gets a bad rep insofar as you have people that are being initially intentionally deceptive. When you have people that try to spread some idea that isn't true, like to spread a lie around or something, then that is the reason why like we think of propaganda as being a bad thing. So Reaper says spin being a kind of tongue-in-cheek way of saying someone has a creative way of talking about something. The word narrative has also recently become very popular, right? So if you're trying to misrepresent the truth to have people feel certain way about something. So like let's just assume that what I'm saying, like seed oil bad for you, let's just assume that that's true. Okay, so if seed oils, let's say indeed they're bad for you, they cause inflammation and all sorts of negative effects for your health, and then somebody just starts to spin the story. Let's see, American Heart Association oils, healthy cooking oils. So let's just suppose that somebody starts trying to tell you that canola oil is better for you, and they start to tell a story like, how do you know it's better for you? Well, it has less saturated fat. And they start to use all sorts of technical and smart sounding language in order to tell you, like, look, okay, you don't even understand all this stuff, but we say it's safe and we're an authoritative body, something like that. then it almost seems like they're really putting a spin on things, and they're trying to sell you on a product or an idea, but they aren't properly representing the truth of it, where in general these things are just bad for you. Okay, Reaper says, so if we bring this back to Ellul and back to Allen's they theory, then we have to ask, to what extent are people like economists promoting technology or globalism engaged in directed propaganda versus just kind of waxing poetic, possible unplanned complexity, and just so happens that their friends like talking about the same things. Yeah. So sometimes when it seems like there's a concerted agreement on certain ideas, are you going to be a coincidence theorist and think, oh, it's just random? They all just happen to be interested in the same things, right? Are you going to be a coincidence theorist, or are you going to look at the actual connections between people and say, like, look, I get together with my friends and we might have an idea like, let's go on a camping trip together. Then, some other people might get together and say, like, let's get together and do a secret dark ritual together. People just do things together. So depending what you're looking at, labels like propaganda, stuff like that could get thrown around negatively. Let's just try to see clearly how stuff is. Like, I gave an example here. You could say I did a little bit of propaganda plugging seed oil bad here, right? You could argue that I did that, and I won't deny that, oh yeah, Alan did a little bit of propagandizing in the sense that I was like spreading a message. And in a similar way, right, you could look at how various organizations, they're all trying to propagate certain messages, such as like more artificial intelligence could help make the world better by solving lots of problems, something like that. Or more green technology could, make for a more sustainable future, and it'll make, more nice looking cities, all that, whatever. So we could just look at the propaganda as a technique, like Jacques Ellul, Technological Society technique. Propaganda is a technique. All sorts of parties might use it, but you could look at who makes the most use of this particular technique and at what scale. And also, too, like I said, I could say, oh, I was propagandizing seed oil bad. Then also, too, like, if we don't freak out, like just hearing the word and be, oh, you called me a propagandist, whatever, like we don't have to freak out either. Just like talk plainly about what's happening. I think that is the takeaway from trying to understand what propaganda is and how it's used. Okay, Reaper says, part of capitalism is the idea of individual self-interest. Is it fair to scale and reuse that concept to say most people don't have a good incentive to engage in plans that are directed at changing society but not helping them specifically? Like, are you saying because of self-interest, people don't choose to buy into social plans? I don't exactly get what you're saying here. I'll just continue on propaganda talk while Reaper might be typing. Okay, so we could see how Mark Zuckerberg, metaverse, VR, all this stuff, it could be an even more immersive, effective form of media than television, entertainment, and so on and so forth. You could more directly like live various experiences. It could be very powerful. So here is quote, when people leave the movie theater, they are full of the possibilities to experience in the shadows. So you're sitting in the dark room looking at the big screen and you're having all sorts of experiences. They have received their dose of inner life. Oof, expressed in pretty sharp terms there. Okay, let's see what Reaper says. Reaper says, in this sense, we might say that overall, most of these tech CEOs are most interested in increasing the value of their stock equity and don't have a lot of incentives to work towards anything that isn't directly doing that. Yeah, I mean, I haven't been like a big tech CEO myself, but you could look like if you're Mark Zuckerberg or someone, he's probably not actually programming computers himself. So what sort of work might he be involved in? Well, one of them might basically be doing like propaganda for the metaverse, because if Facebook is able to get more money then this could mean more funds that are directed into the research that could develop the metaverse technology. So if Zuckerberg isn't actually being the engineer himself doing these things, as a CEO, what he wants to do is steer the company in the direction he likes, and also make sure that his company is able to continue on, to not collapse. Right, he's like a captain of a corporate ship. So increasing the value of a stock, that might be like one goal that he has, right? But maybe more important, the goal would be to get this metaverse thing built eventually. So the stock might go up and down, but if he has as his goal, as he was announcing with Meta, rebranding himself as a Meta company. So he's probably got enough money floating around that even if Facebook stock went down a lot and then back up, whatever, as long as the money's being funded, that's being put in to fund the development of the projects he cares about, then I reckon he would be regarded as a pretty successful CEO in terms of being able to accomplish the corporate mission that he set out to do. Reaper says, I guess I'm saying that most of these powerful people are focused on their own lives and assets and only mildly really concerned with what each other are doing. Yeah, I mean, I think they're individual people. They have their own things that they want to do, and this too, we could talk about press releases, this sort of thing. Do I imagine that, let's say Mark Zuckerberg hates Jeff Bezos? I don't know, probably not. They're probably both just doing their own thing. I don't know either personally, so I can't say what they've said about that, but I would assume that all of them, they have their own goals and objectives about what they want to do, and they're kind of at the top level of being the people that control stuff, that call the shots. So a lot of the things that might worry a worker, somebody might be worried, can I pay or not pay my rent? People like Mark Zuckerberg, they aren't concerned about whether or not they could pay the rent. They might say should I have 5 houses or 4 houses? I don't know. But their types of concerns they have are probably much different from a lot of just normal working people. Okay, Reaper says, so then if you see a bunch of people acting at the same time, it's more likely to be that each individual had that incentive combined with the current technology was ready for a new stage versus all the people coming together. This would be except for Microsoft that conspired to destroy HTML and open standards by promoting XHTML to the W3C. That is clearly evil. Let's see. Yeah, well, I think here you're starting to bring up another topic, which I'm not going to specifically talk about in this stream, but we could talk about it some other time. I'll add it to the future topics, which is, let's call it competition versus collusion. I'll make that e.g. in tech. So if you have a bunch of big tech companies, you could ask, to what extent are they actually competing with each other, or is it rather that they all have they're all doing their own thing, and ultimately they mutually piggyback and help one another, but they don't have much overlap and stuff such that they aren't really competing with each other. They all essentially have a monopoly. That would be an interesting topic to see. Right. Whereas there are some fields, let's just say automobile manufacturers. Of course, it seems to me like you do have a bunch of different companies that are competing with each other. Whereas there's other areas where you could see one company really dominates and has the market share. And then, of course, with government stuff, there's only one party that could issue a driver's license in a state. Some things are just, by their nature of how they're set up, there's no competition. Okay, continuing. On radio and television. So Ellul talks about how radio and TV are used by people to fill in silence. So after going through a long day, working through your technological society job, people might feel dissociated from each other. They don't know how to interact with each other. he uses this phrase, the resonant emptiness. So radio or television is the modern mask man puts on every evening, which unfortunately lacks the virtues of the ancient mask, demoniac and divine. So here, radio, television, entertainment of various sorts, it's being presented as a kind of participatory ritual. Like, let's turn off all the lights so I don't see the reality I'm in, and then I will concentrate on the sound or the sight of the show that I'm seeing. And Ellul makes a note about audio specifically. So silence is powerful because it could promote contemplation. And hence you might say, like, is everything I'm in, is it fake? Am I just in the matrix? So Ellul says the ear, unlike the eye, evokes mystery and renunciation. It is the center of anguish and anxiety, and radio fills this opening, protecting man against silence and the mystery by amusing him. So why would somebody rather listen to an infomercial rather than silence? Could be that, just to have these familiar noise, even if you might say it's kind of annoying, it fills a void, and if you concentrate your attention on that, the stimulus that's coming through, then you won't have to worry about your own thoughts as much because you have something to kind of blast them out. Reaper says, oh, that's an Ellul quote. Sounds like bowling alone. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. There's a lot of overlap in observations. Okay, another quote. The radio and television, even more than the radio, shuts up the individual in an echoing mechanical universe in which he is alone. He already knew little enough about his neighbors, and now the separation between him and his fellows is further widened. Man became accustomed to listening to machines and talking to machines, as, for example, with telephones and dictaphones. No more face-to-face encounters, no more dialogue, and a perpetual monologue by means of which he escapes the anguish of silence and inconveniences of neighbors. Man finds refuge in the lap of technique, which envelops him in solitude and at the same time reassures him with all its hoaxes. Oof. Just responding to this quote, the internet is interesting to me because clearly a lot of not one-way communication happens on the internet. I think this is one of the reasons why I'm millennial generation, a lot of people really got interested and embraced the internet because there's a lot of communication and work that people do on the internet, whereas I think listening to the radio and watching the TV is a lot more associated with this more kind of passive reception as opposed to actively engaging in some type, especially when here it's talking about being enveloped in solitude and reassured by like hoaxes or lies, basically escaping into some kind of fantasy. Of course, a lot of people, when they're interacting on the internet, then they might encounter a bunch of you could say uncomfortable situations. Like, for example, here, me, by going out and making YouTube videos, right, then I open myself up to be attacked in various ways. People could leave a mean comment. You could put a thumbs down that the public can't see, but only I could see, thanks to the new YouTube update. Like, all sorts of stuff could happen. There's a sense in which when you do put yourself out on the internet, unlike with television and radio, you do open yourself up to criticism and things like that. So I think the internet is a little bit different. But still, right, a lot of the times, like if I'm playing a solo computer game, I'm just watching YouTube videos by myself instead of enjoying and chilling on a live stream. Thanks for everyone who's joining. If you do that, it's solo content, then it's quite a different experience, and that would fit more in line with the television radio example that's being given here. And yeah, with respect to that, like with radio, for example, I've never called into a radio show, but I know it's a thing you used to do. So if people actually like you call into a show, you talk with somebody on air, that's like what you all do when you interact with me here on a live stream. So similar ideas, new form and more democratized in many ways. The interwebs, very interesting. I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about the interwebs and the many forms it takes. Okay. And then I'll just briefly summarize this. So Ellul has a section on sports, and basically he's talking about how sports is also a type of technique. So an athlete, they'll optimize themselves for a particular sort of physical activity. You know, if you play basketball, you probably want to win at basketball. You're a cyclist, you want to, win competitions, races, stuff like that. So the whole idea of sporting in the sense of making these things a competition is a technological society thing. Now, I made a note here. I said rejection of the sporting mentality and doing exercises, going outside, etc. seems to be an effective way to pursue bodily health while not getting trapped up in the technological society stuff. So I think, don't be like, sports suck. I don't want to be sucked into the technological society, so I'm just gonna sit here and eat Cheetos. That's not the right answer. Maybe go on a walk and enjoy some silence. Go on a hike. You just leave, go for a hike, right? Climb a mountain. That might be good for you, but that would be a different of nature than the sort of regimented actions and stuff that often come with sports. Okay, and then here's a quote of Ellul throwing shade on the USA. So Jacques Ellul, he's a French guy. What does he have to say about Merca? He says, it is worth noting that technicized sport was first developed in the United States, the most conformist of all countries, and that it was then developed as a matter of course by dictatorships, fascist, Nazi, and communist, to the point that it became an indispensable constituent element of totalitarian regimes. So, USA versus USSR, sports. I wasn't alive during this time, but I hear that rivalries like that have always been a big thing. We could see how sport is even still being used today as something to really draw people's attention and to identify with causes that a country might want them to identify with. Now in the 21st century, we have esports, and we also have cyber warfare and other online activities. I just made that note to say, too, that this general form of sport, it doesn't even have to do with physical movement per se, just in your leisure time that you're participating in fixed rule games. So we see that same thing now with esports, which is you take the technique of sports, but now maybe people get injured less frequently. It's cheaper to gather people together, all these different things from a controller perspective. Esports is a great boon to the technological society. Okay. So then there's a section on medicine. Ellul remarks he doesn't know as much about medicine, so a lot of that's more speculative. I think I'll just not go over this section. Okay, another quote. So he had this heading, echoes. I'm not exactly sure what he means by that, but let us just look at a couple more quotes. A single technique and its guarded application to a limited sphere is the starting point of dissociation. No technician anywhere would say that he is submitting men collectively or individually to technique. The biogeneticist who experiments on the human embryo, or the film director who tries to affect his audience to the greatest possible degree, makes no claim that he is working on man. The individual is broken into a number of independent fragments, and no two techniques have the same dimensions or depth, nor does any combination of techniques, for example, propaganda plus vocational guidance, correspond to any part of the human being. The result is that every technique can assert its innocence. So what this quote is saying is, you guys are all becoming ultra-based and red-pilled by listening to this analysis of the Jacques Ellul Technological Society book. But that's to say, I could affirm this right from my own experience. As many of us live our lives, participate in the technological society, you don't actively think of yourself like, oh, I'm being a propagandist or something like that. Rather, it's like, oh yeah, I got a teaching position, teaching such and such. And it's only if you take some moments to really look at what you're doing, slow down, so on and so forth, that think, oh, hey, is this really a good thing that I'm doing? Like, what is it that I'm doing? So people, they might be acting in the system in all sorts of capacities, and everybody, the result is every technique can assert its innocence. That's saying, right, I'm just doing my job. I'm just doing this. People asked for this service. I provided that service. And with that being said, too, I'll say, if you are, actively participating in the technological society, I'm not saying like don't participate. It's like everybody has to feed their family, care for themselves, like do whatever. So let's not judge people. Everyone do what you have to do. But this book, Technological Society, it is explaining how all these various seemingly different things all come together, united around this common construct, whatever you want to call it, of technique. Right. Another quote. Technicians are not very complicated beings. In truth, they are as simple as their techniques, which more and more assimilate them. I think like a kind of illustrative example of this would be, let's pretend you just really are interested in computers, you're good at computers, you like working on computers. I bet at places like Google, Facebook, and so on, there's probably a lot of people that just work there. They get paid well. They do like computer programming, and they just really like solving technical problems on computers and doing computer programming. One example of a field that I have not done and I don't particularly want to do would be like computer graphics or computer vision. I'm not particularly interested in all the technical stuff that goes behind that, but you can imagine someone that's really interested in that, just how do images get represented on computers, this sort of thing. They just do all these research into these areas, and maybe like Google, Microsoft, Facebook, someone like that, big tech, pays them to develop and continue going forward on this thing. Then if they're just happy doing that one little thing, they're engaging in their work, they're doing a good job, and so on and so forth. Like, they're being quite simple. Technicians are not very complicated beings. It's like, what do you do? Well, I'm optimizing this and this, so this color, this and that, something I don't understand. Then that person could be quite well treated and assimilated into the technological society, just by, they're simply a technician, and they're really skilled. They'll be amply rewarded for that, especially if they do something that a lot of people are asking for. And if insofar as someone assimilates more, for example, the extent to which you identify with your career, then that might also be an indicator of how far integrated you are into the technological society. Okay, another quote. So here's the context. So for what purpose do technicians work? And the answer Ellul provides is, well, they're working for some kind of result, right? So the graphics person might be optimizing something, some speed of a function, how fast it executes, and then the results are to be for some other abstraction. So a technician might say, if you're like, what is it that you do? Why do you do it? They might say, the man for whom I am working is humanity, the species, the proletariat, the race, man the creature, man the eternal, even you. All technical systems, whether they be expressed in communist or liberal phraseology, come back in the final analysis to this abstraction. All technicians too. The technicians, in any case, do not have sufficient intellectual curiosity to ask themselves what their favorite abstraction really means, or what the relation is between this abstraction and technique. So I'll just, disclaimer, I'll say, maybe true for a lot of people, but not all. Let's not just say, oh, you're technically good at computers, therefore you lack the intellectual curiosity to ask. Someone might really just work on optimizing Linux sound drivers or something because they're good at it, it interests them, but then also too, they might know, like, really my job doesn't mean anything, but it pays the bills, so I do it. Not gonna assume anything about individuals. but it's just this general point that Ellul is making, that technician, especially if their career is very consuming of their time, their attention, they might really, really get caught up in things. Okay, we got some more to go, so let's keep on going. Next subheading, l'homme machine, the man machine. Here, Jacques Ellul presents some prose that starts to sound a bit transhumanisty. So let's hear what he has to say. In the coupling of man and machine, a genuinely new entity comes into being. Man's nature has already been modified, and it is to an already adapted individual that technique adapts mechanical apparatus. Such adaptation is becoming progressively easier and even takes place spontaneously when the human techniques cooperate. And another quote, technicized man literally no longer exists except in relation to the technical infrastructure. So observation I had about this passage is, I think people to various degrees, they might be more or less technically inclined. Like, how well do you learn and assimilate new technologies? So, like, I gave a personal note here. Like, me personally, I think that I've always liked using computers, and I do some programming and stuff. I'm not like, never totally went in and learned about, how the nuts and bolts of an operating system work. But like, for example, setting up YouTube, trying out some new software, doing a stream, like none of this has been particularly difficult or challenging for me because I've been working with computer stuff for a long time. The note here, I recall sometimes carrying around a computer for the reason that using computer, my abilities were far augmented. And then apart from a machine, I lost my powers. So like one thing, for example, I could remember how to write a bunch of Chinese words if I have a computer and I could type them. But I can't just out of memory like write tons and tons of characters because I'm not in practice to do so. But aided by machines, then my abilities are augmented. So in that sense, you could say, yeah, with respect to this one domain, and in general, right, like Alan is a very computer technological society integrated technician nerd. And if you take away his computers, he might be, oh no, I can't do the same things because I'm so used to using those tools for doing stuff. So I'm on my way to becoming l'homme machine. Okay, more quotes. The ideal man is an escapism which eases every kind of enormity with tranquilizing abstractions. Ooh, that's a big phrase there. So once again, just recontextualizing all this chapter, human techniques, dealing a lot with psychology. How is it that people are able to accept the technological society? Here, one thing that's being suggested is tranquilizing. Then this is how they justify continuing what they're doing. And I'll just say, yeah, from my own experience, like, what was some reason that I learned a bunch of computer stuff? One of the reasons was, if computers, laptops, whatever, this is our cutting edge technology, and I'm alive in the 21st century. Might as well learn how to use the best of the tools that we have available to us, because if that could be like a major advantage of living in this society, and I have a okay aptitude for it, like why not go ahead and learn more about this sort of machine, this sort of thing that could really help me. So to that extent, viewing a computer and stuff as a way, how do I further integrate into the technical society? The abstraction of, I guess, the furthering of progress with technology, something like that, indirectly has been something that's drawn me into learning how to do some stuff that I know how to do. All right, another quote, big plans for all of us. In a completely technicized world, there will be whole categories of men who will have no place at all because universal adaptation will be required. Those who are adaptable will be so rigorously adapted that no play in the complex will be possible. The complete joining of man and machine will have the advantage, however, of making the adaptation painless, and it will assure the technical efficiency of the individuals who survive it. So, like for me, looking at this quote, I would be like, well, I better learn how to use technology and stuff if I'm going to make it in this world. That's the type of idea here where, it seems this quote is admitting, I guess we're saying, a lot of people with the technological society will be left behind. Basically, they'll have no place, they won't fit, whereas those that are willing to integrate themselves to the machine, the technological society, in some capacity, that they may be able to seamlessly integrate painless adaptation in some way. And I think one place we could see this today is like if you truly don't know how to use a smartphone in a lot of places, your life will be quite hard. And actually, using a smartphone, I'm actually not very good at using a smartphone because I prefer to use like a computer keyboard, a mouse, and that sort of stuff. So sometimes when I have to do stuff on a smartphone, like I'm sure I could figure it out, and if I got a faster phone, it would be easier. But it's kind of like the way I use a smartphone is much slower than a person who uses it as their main device. Okay, next section. The dissociation of man. So man is dissociated and remade as ideal man. What does that mean? A quote, "We thereby admit that, when all is said and done, the ideal state higher than consciousness is a dreaming sleep." So to me, this sounded like the movie The Matrix, right? So is ultimate efficiency like we're all sleeping, we're plugged into the Matrix as batteries to power the simulation. Is that what's best? Maybe by the technological society. With metaverse land, it seems like that's almost what they're going for. So is that the final end product that is being built? I don't know. Okay. A quote about leisure time being filled with techniques. What if a man's leisure allowed him to judge his own work? What if, in becoming cultivated, or even better, a real person, he should rebel against his stupid, mechanized job, or find his 4 hours of obligatory servitude an intolerable abasement? It is unimaginable. We conclude that the education of the human personality cannot but conform to the postulates of technical civilization. Man's leisure must reinforce the other elements of his culture, so there will be no risk of producing poorly adjusted persons. So poorly adjusted person being somebody who would reject the technical society, would not want to be a part of the technical society. So how do you work on the psychology of people so that they do not become that poorly adjusted person? So what do people do in their leisure? There are people who have hobbies such as gardening or puttering about the house. But what is the proportion of such people who do nothing? The melancholy fact is that the human personality has been wholly disassociated and dissolved through mechanization. So that's to say that this blurb about dreaming, the ideal state for a person in this society is like, what do people do? Well, maybe you do some capacity of work, your technical work, and maybe your work will be that you're a battery to power the matrix. And then in your so-called leisure time, then you just, if you do nothing and stuff, you just zone out, enjoy some entertainments, things like that. Then actually that might be the sort of person that most perfectly conforms or fits into the technological society. Okay, interesting quote here under the subheading, "The Triumph of the Unconscious. I have indicated that propaganda is based on the manipulation of the subconscious by technical means. So are those hyper-modern police methods which have as their end the establishment of a neurotic complex based on feelings of insecurity. Our technical world not only creates these feelings spontaneously, it develops them with malice aforethought for technical reasons and by technical means which in their action on the human being reinforce the structures of the technical world. The only person who remains a private individual is he who is asleep, declared Robert Lay in a noteworthy phrase. So, sleep, dreams, how is this related to the technical society? It's like the technical society is a fake, different layer that goes on top of the real society, real world, and operates on totally different rules. So the logical extension of that is like as an individual, if you have your own dreams, your own thought, your own world that you go away to, what is your hobby? Like I like to sleep and dream and astral project. Like those are probably the sorts of things that a technological society controller would want you to do. And I will say, do not fool around and do things like astral projection. It could end very poorly. Don't do it. Okay. Mass man. So once again, technological society, one of the efforts of the psychology working is to get people integrated into mass society. So what is the mass man that is integrated into mass society? The goal of human techniques is to create mass man, right? And here, the primary purpose of advertising technique is the creation of a certain way of life. So we could look at how big tech is offering lots of things that are suggesting people ways to change their way of life. For example, drone deliveries, self-driving cars, etc., etc. So how are we invited to participate in all of this? Quote, the purpose of psychological methods is to neutralize or eliminate aberrant individuals and tendencies to fractionation. Simultaneously, the tendency to collectivization and reinforce in order to immunize the environment against the possible virus of agreement. So, mass society means no virus of disagreement. Instead, we're all united in agreement. That's mass society. Reaper says, oh, technological society controller, who are those? Sounds like we're now talking about technological society being orchestrated by a few people again. Dude, it's just them. It's just they, bro. So I'll just refresh here. It's like, is it like one little group of people that's controlling stuff? One of the big points of this book, The Technological Society, is that the technological society is like a autonomous machine that does itself. So the technological society, just the way it's structured, the way the institutions it produces, and so on and so forth, it's such that it's like a machine that's running on its own. It's a kind of singularity. Only the artificial intelligence isn't like the machine became conscious or something. Rather, there's these self-replicating sort of structures that make a society that keeps on optimizing. And in that way, it seems to kind of have a will in a way, and that it makes decisions. It makes decisions in that society and things will change in a particular way, and it tries to get people to bend and to accept it. But that isn't the same as saying that there's a few people who have this idea like, how could we be maximum evil? Not so much like that. Rather, these structures and these things are in place which create this sort of society that encourages this mass man, this undifferentiated man. So I'm not saying like, oh yeah, just such and such oligarchs, these are the bad guys. If they went away, then the problems would be solved. It's not like that. It's like the very structure of all of it, such that like an individual, even like Mark Zuckerberg, like if Mark Zuckerberg flew away on a private jet and just lived on an island for the rest of his life and he went missing, I think everything would just continue going. Like even those individuals do not matter so much with the structure of these things. Okay, Reaper says, how is a technological society related to Hegel? How is it related to Adam Smith's invisible hand? I think briefly we've talked about Hegel dialectics. I don't know enough about Hegel specifically to get it right that what I'm talking about is directly a Hegel idea. So I'm not going to try right now. And how is it related to Adam Smith's invisible hand? Well, in the same way, you could see like Adam Smith's invisible hand is a like theoretic abstraction. It's an abstraction to talk about like how markets and stuff work. Like things are just being guided in a certain way, not by any personal input per se, but just by you have certain rules, then a certain phenomenon will emerge. So I guess in a similar way, how you might talk about like an invisible hand, you could look at technique generally, technological society technique, as being an even more general invisible hand that's guiding society towards this technological society. So there's this abstraction, technique, whatever, and then technique is producing this autonomous, self-organizing thing that's trending in a certain way. Okay. Another Ellul quote. When psychological techniques in close cooperation with material techniques have at last succeeded in creating unity, all possible diversity will have disappeared, and the human race will have become a block of complete and irrational solidarity. So what is meant here by irrational? We could talk as like rationality as being like the individual, the rational capacity of each person to say like, you know, why this? Why are you doing this? This would fall under the like dissent or disagreement, seeing problems in the technological society, and that being able to have rationality, intellect, free will, all these things, and see what's happening. That's one of the things that makes us human. And when you have the irrational solidarity of the technological society final form, what does that mean? Well, essentially people are being reduced to animals, no longer people with free will, intelligence, all this. It's just, you're just a passion-driven beast now if the system comes to its final form. Okay, interesting quote here under this section, total integration. So Ellul writes, the technical society must perfect the man-machine complex or risk total collapse. So this is kind of describing the mechanism by which this thing has to keep on growing, becoming more big, becoming more totalitarian. A note I made is this sounds a lot like a pyramid scheme, because it's like it has to keep on growing, keep on assuming more things, bringing in more people into it, or it will collapse. It's not a sustainable thing. It like is like a cancer. It'll just grow, and then it either kills its host, like the earth that just can't sustain, everything blows up, or it will collapse because it gets, however these things collapse. Too many people wake up to it, whatever it is. And we have a quote, in sum, the supreme forces of human nature are set into motion for the sake of amusement. The great bell in the cathedral tower, formerly rung to call the city's warriors to arms, is sounded to amuse foreign tourists. So, how or why might the technological society just blow up, implode on itself? Well, ultimately, the technological society has people distracted and wasting their time. So, a lot of the psychological stuff that was being discussed in this chapter was how you don't want people to contemplate. You don't want people to have silence, things like that. Instead, you have the system that just constantly keeps people busy and active and awake enough and satisfied enough that they could wake up and do it another day, but ultimately unfulfilled and just continually distracting themselves, coping, if you will. Right, so that's why people feel desires to escape into fantasy in the technological society, of which we're kind of in a form of a technological society now, though it's not totally complete everywhere all the time, but there are, I think this book aptly describes many of the things that we see. Okay, quote, technique fully satisfies the mystic will to possess and dominate. It is necessary to evoke spiritual powers when machines give it is unnecessary to evoke spiritual powers. Machines give much better results. But technique also encourages and develops mystical phenomenon. It promotes the indispensable alienation from the self necessary, for example, for the identification of the individual with an ideology. Whether man identifies with a father figure or with an abstraction, this identification is incited by the recognition of an exceptional charismatic quality. So the technological society here distracting, wasting their time, and also too it scatters people because it's like there's so many possible ways in which somebody could integrate themselves or like embrace the technological society. It doesn't matter specifically what you choose as long as you find your place in the system. So like tech bro, business bro culture, then some people, they might find their niche in doing like just mentorship, just training up people, hustling, this sort of thing, and just being on this treadmill of constantly doing this sort of thing. Even if it's kind of pyramid schemey or whatever, that might be one's place where they find themselves totally involved in the technological society, like growing your NFT empire, whatever it is. Okay. Another example, interesting quote here. So Ellul writes, we have noted jazz has become universal. The reason is now clear. It is the music of men who are satisfied with the illusion of freedom provoked by its sounds, while the chains of iron wind around them ever tighter. So Ellul brought up how jazz was created by a lot of African American people, who their situation might be really oppressing them, but they found an escape through his music. So my question here is, like, in addition to jazz, like in its musical form, and the metaverse, right? What sort of escapes might people find? I think already we've seen in games like Second Life, for example, a lot of big MMORPGs. You could have, or Minecraft, Roblox, stuff like this. People could find their escape just saying, in my real life, I'm trapped, I'm restrained. But then in this virtual world, I have the freedom to explore all these possibilities, to build these giant cities, to do whatever they want, to explore new lands, and so on and so forth. Okay, and then we have this final ending spicy quote, which I'll read. With the final integration of the instinctive and the spiritual by means of these human techniques, the edifice of the technical society will be completed. It will not be a universal concentration camp, for it will be guilty of no atrocity. It will not seem insane, for everything will be ordered, and the stains of human passion will be lost amidst the chromium gleam. We shall have nothing more to lose and nothing to win. Our deepest instincts and our most secret passions will be analyzed, published, and exploited. We shall be rewarded with everything our hearts ever desired, and the supreme luxury of the society of technical necessity will be to grant the bonus of useless revolt and an acquiescent smile. Wow. Okay, so ending paragraph there with some pretty poetic language by Jacques Ellul. Basically, it sounds like the Matrix in the sense that it's this subsume all human life under this total system. So it might not take the form of everyone with like VR goggles being plugged into a computer game immediately, but maybe that would sort of be the logical endpoint of what it is, where you like plug in your brain stem and the computer system will feed your responses, and then in some way you'll like help the system with your like body heat powering it, whatever, something like that. So that concludes the content that I have prepared today for looking at Chapter 5, Human Techniques in the Technological Society. So it looks like We don't have any additional comments or chats this time, so I just want to thank everybody who took the time to join today. Do all the YouTube stuff, like, share, smash the notification bell. Thanks everyone for joining. I think that I will continue to do Technological Society. Let's see what the next chapter is on. Oh, it's the Future Speculative chapter, a look at the future. So I think this is probably the last chapter. Anyways, I'll do a video on a stream on that, and it'll be interesting. We'll see if what Jacques Ellul says, his predictions of the future writing from the mid-20th century, are we beginning to see these things happen in the 21st century, or does it look like a lot of the stuff that he has predicted sounds like he was way off? I don't know. We'll look at his predictions and consider, too, what we've looked at in these other streams. And with that being said, thanks all for joining, and I'll see you all next time.